All right, let's start with that. 605 additional positive cases recorded yesterday, bringing the national tally to 23,202. Yesterday also saw the highest number of recoveries since in Kenya, with 587 people that had recovered or basically were discharged from hospital. Previously, the highest number was 570. Yesterday, 587. So total recoveries in the country stand at 9,327. The country has tested a total of 322,923. And so just under a tenth of those total tested are positive cases. All right, let's look around the world. 18,700,000.
Repeat it again, just under a tenth.
Just under a tenth, yes.
High?
Just under a tenth of
those tested.
Of those tested have been positive.
In those 24 hours?
No. In total.
Total? Yes. Okay. Because in the 24 hours it keeps...
No, it keeps fluctuating. But if we're looking at the whole number that have been tested in the country, just under a tenth.
Okay.
All right. In the world, 18,701,672. Those are the numbers that we're looking at now. Still with the United States right up there, very, very close to 5 million cases, with 4,918,420 positive cases, with now 160,290 deaths. And the discussion was that when the United States reached 150,000 deaths, that would be cause for concern. So I don't know what this is going to be cause for now that they're at 160,000 and still rising. More concern, just a little bit more. And case be that whereby you had the sharp rise in many states in the U.S., now what you have is that maybe the cases are dropping ever so slightly, but the deaths are increasing. So those who had presented then with symptoms of COVID, quite a number of them now, unfortunately, are dying from complications.
But these are known complications that are related to COVID.
Yes.
Well, we have a different scenario in this country where people are dying because the tests have taken a long time. So you do not know whether the person has COVID or not.
Or not, unfortunately.
Yes. And the numbers are rising.
Right, so we're going to look at that in a little bit of detail in terms of what exactly the problem is and why I see you scrunching your face, because it's ridiculous that, test results are taking so long to reach, so people cannot even be treated. We'll look into the details of it. Let me tell you the numbers in Brazil while you take a breath. 2,808,076 cases in Brazil now, with 96,096 deaths. South Africa, the numbers did not rise so sharply. Well, actually, they did. Yesterday, about 516,000. Today, they're at 521,000. So an increase of about 6,000 cases in South Africa yesterday. Mexico, whereby they took a little bit of a break in terms of the high numbers that they were seeing, that has risen yet again to 6,148 cases in the last 7 hours, with more than 10%. Of that number being deaths recorded, 857. Okay. So, we're still looking at more or less the same numbers. They're rising around the world. So if we look at the North African countries, Algeria, Morocco, between 27,000 to 35,000 is what they're seeing. Kenya now, 23,000. And if we look at other countries that have the same numbers as Kenya, for example, Ireland, a little bit more, 26,253. However, with a population of just under 5 million people, Kenya has 23,000 with a population of 47 million people. If you want to do some kind of a comparison there. Australia continues to shine a light on this. 714 cases in the last 24 hours, with unfortunately 15 of those resulting in death. And whereas they had been down to about 10 cases per day for about 14 days, now those numbers are rising, and quite sharply so. So we're still looking at this. It still continues to be a thing, and we just have to keep an eye on it.
Indeed. How are South Africans faring?
Well, so quite a number of people still presenting to hospital with symptoms, and then have to be admitted with this treatment. They got to the point whereby a couple of days ago, President Ramaphosa actually said, this will actually impact our health system because we do not know if we will be able to manage the high numbers of people who are coming into hospital. They actually have not, interestingly enough, rolled out any kind of official home-based care protocols because they're taking in people into hospital as much as they can. And though they do have quite a number of asymptomatic cases, they still have quite a high number of symptomatic cases that have to present to hospital.
But remember, as early as May and slightly beyond, they had actually used the same protocol and the network that they had used for combating HIV in looking at these very, very same issues of COVID. So home-based care, as we currently understand it, or should we say community intervention, had begun in South Africa.
It was already a thing.
Yes, they had started it. It's now caught on here, and it's the buzzword that we keep using, but they had begun this a long time ago. In fact, if you remember when the numbers had steadied and they had sort of like, should we say, reached that plateau that people keep talking of, it was actually being credited to this very method that they were using, a resource that they had, and simply ensuring that that network is used to reach people. So
and people who tested positive were being treated at home.
Yes,
Isolated at home and staying at home.
Yes, they were. They were because they had a mechanism that enabled them to do a follow-up.
Yeah.
You see, and we haven't heard. Maybe you can tell us if you have. What is the sort of should we say infection rate amongst its health workers or their health workers
In South Africa.
We're going to look into that in just a bit.
We can look at that and see.
I ask because in this fight against COVID, the level of preparedness, especially with regard to the safety of those whom we call our frontline warriors and fighters, becomes very, very crucial. Because if those numbers reduce, then you actually reduce your capacity for actually combating the disease.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, South Africa is, yes, still one of the worst hit countries in the world. And if we look at health workers and how they've been affected, about 1,230 health workers in South Africa have already been infected with the virus. And they're looking at how they can work on this. Yeah, okay, so it's quite a high number, and it's not compared against how many they have in the country, but it's a worrying number for them. 1,246 have already been compromised in South Africa.
Healthcare workers.
Healthcare workers, yes.
That's a high number.
It is.
That's a high number. I mean, and it's sort of something that it's a global trend.
Yeah.
It's something that you will see across the world because obviously that their exposure is higher. But they are not complaining about not getting adequate PPEs. It's not for lack of being taken care of by their government.
Absolutely.
It's never been an issue, really. No.
The provision of PPEs for the healthcare workers in South Africa, I mean, it's not risen to a point where, like we're seeing in Kenya, where even the medics are going on strike. They're downing their tools. They're saying, you know what?
We're not being protected.
Yeah, we're not being protected. So why are we doing this? It's also it would be interesting, and I think we've sort of not followed up keenly on this, on how home-based care is being managed in the country. For instance, in talking to Dr. Chibonda, have you received any kind of support from home? I mean, because Dr. Chibonda is at home. This is basically typical home-based care. So, is there anybody who's taking your vitals? Is there any communication? I mean, if you felt like your symptoms are deteriorating, or is there any proper information on what you should do?
The closest we got to perhaps having an inkling as to what goes on was the provost of All Saints. Because he had to go home and some form of home-based care had to be administered. And I remember what I found interesting was him talk about the effects of stigma almost directly on his family. And remember we asked him, so healthcare workers, did you encounter any? And then the next time we encountered one was when we were talking to the principal secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or when we were discussing the matters that he had
raised.
Yes, exactly. And he said he had one phone call.
Someone just confirming the name.
End of story.
Yeah. And I think
Is your name Kamau? Okay.
Okay.
that's it. I think
Might your other name be Macharia? Okay.
unfortunately, I think that's about the size of it when it comes to what's being done in terms of protocol. If you look at the protocol, actually, what is supposed to happen is that, you go home-based care. There's certain things that they need to make sure are available at your residence, that you should be able to have a space that only you then can occupy as the individual, and that you'll be cut off essentially from anybody else in that home, and that you can have a washroom that you can also use by yourself. Also, that people would serve you food outside the door, and that they also should have at the very least gloves and a face mask to serve you for all times and all meals. And then it was that there would be a community health worker who would essentially come to your home, take your information. The people at home who essentially were
What
serving
information?
Right, so the people who are serving you food at home essentially should take your vitals every 6 hours. All
And
right,
these vitals include?
temperature. Right, it's your temperature that they were looking at, essentially how that has risen or dropped. And then the community health worker essentially would come to your home, right, and get this information on a daily basis and basically check up on you in terms of how you're doing until the 14 days of isolation then were to be finished. And then now a second test is administered, and then 24 hours later,
So they
a
come for
third
the
test.
sample at home.
Yes, this is what is supposed to happen according to the protocol from the Ministry of Health.
And before the results come back, you still stay in isolation.
Yes.
And now the results are taking 10 days. So a further 10 days waiting for your results in
You're going to be
isolation.
home for at
Well,
least 30
the
days.
10 days is, if I'm to go by what I'm seeing in the media, is more mythical than it's real. Because they're talking about 14 days. And if you're talking about 14 days, it probably means it's longer.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's no specific time that you can say. And then, by the way, CDC has thrown a curveball into this conversation. You see, before they would test you, when you've been quarantined, test you again. CDC are now saying, this second test is not necessarily.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So one negative, good.
It's good.
Okay.
But that one raises very many questions. What if the kit is faulty? That's where I start off. Yes. Oh, yes.
All
The
those
kit
things.
can be faulty.
Yep.
All those things. Well, big questions. 17 minutes after 6, it's a situation room, Kenya's biggest conversation. Let's take this quick break, see what's happening weather-wise around the world, and then start looking at the big stories of the day. Good morning.
"24/7 around the world, non-stop. This is Spice FM.
It's been an uncertain couple of months, and we are still experiencing the effects of COVID-19 pandemic in our lives. However, we're bouncing back. Our resilience like never before has shown even brighter. And in our adaptation to a new normal, we find a purpose to believe in a better tomorrow. Which is why the Standard Group is bringing you the 47 million reasons. It's all about finding something and someone to be hopeful for during this pandemic. From first responders, mental health, unity to hope. We owe it to ourselves to keep going, getting stronger than ever. 47 million reasons, celebrating you and me. You are our reason. And we have 47 million of them. Brought to you by Radio Maisha, Spice FM, Vibes Radio, KTN Home, and BTV.
Did you know that water and sanitation-related diseases are the leading cause of death for children under the age of 5 in Kenya?
Okay, Wednesday morning, let's take a look at the skies. In Nairobi, mostly cloudy at 14 degrees. We'll see a high of 24 and lows of 12 today. It's partly cloudy in Nakuru at 13, highs of 23 and lows of 12, with showers expected later on. Showers also expected in Nyeri, highs of 22 and lows of 13. Mostly cloudy conditions at the moment. It's mostly cloudy in Eldoret at 13, thunderstorms expected for later with highs of 18 and lows of 12. It's mostly cloudy in Kisumu at 19 degrees, highs of 27, coming down to a low of 18. Mostly cloudy again in Kakamega at 16, highs of 24 and lows of 15, with showers expected later, even onto thunderstorms. It's already raining in Mombasa this morning at 24. It'll continue through most parts of the morning with highs of 28 and lows of 23 through the day. Mostly cloudy in Malindi at 24, highs of 28 and lows of 24. Step out of Kenya, look into Uganda. We're at 18 degrees. It's mostly cloudy, highs of 26 and lows of 17. It's 23 and mostly cloudy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, highs of 31 and lows of 22. It's a bit of a chilly morning in Joburg. Clear skies this morning, however, at 7 degrees. We'll see highs of 21 and lows of 6. Lagos, clear skies this morning at 24, highs of 29 and lows of 23. In Paris, clear skies at 15 degrees, highs of 31 and lows of 15. Sunny conditions throughout today. In the London summer, 16 this morning and partly cloudy, highs of 26 and lows of 16. Tuesday night in New York beckons clear skies. It'll be 25 the high and lows of 22. A local hurricane statement has been given. Looking out for that heavy weather later on.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings.
Okay, it's 22 minutes after 6 o'clock. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us this morning. Remember, our live stream is up, www.spicefm.co.ke, as well as SpiceFM KE, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. As we head towards the big stories of the day, let's start with the big proverb of the day.
The big proverb of the day comes from Sierra Leone. When you raise a leopard, you should not be upset when it eats your goat.
Yep.
Don't let a fox into the hen house.
That's what happens when your wild animal is a fox. As we are spoiled for choice. We have hyenas. We have wild dogs.
Your wild animal is a fox. It's not even a wild animal. It's just one of those animals.
Yes,
really.
Surely there are places where a wild animal, a
It's a
reptile,
mongoose.
oh yes, or a reptile is a worm. I'm being facetious.
Yes, you are. Wow, well, that reptile is a worm. Okay.
Hey, okay, when you raise a leopard, don't be shocked
If it eats your goat.
if it eats your goat. That's a good one.
Many communities have similar sayings, but the meaning, I think, is not difficult to understand. Yes.
Big stories this morning.
Okay. So, it's a big story, but it's a little one. Kenya wins battle against locusts for now, according to the FAO. This is on the front page of the Standard. Very little story there, but I think important for us to look at in terms of how that has happened, whether weather patterns have changed or interventions actually took place whereby this could happen. So just quickly looking at that. The desert locust infestation could be coming under control now, but it has left a trail of destruction, particularly worsening food insecurity in parts of the country that were hard hit by the invasion. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, Kenya has beaten the locust scourge, at least for now. FAO, however, warns that more people in Kenya and the region will be food insecure due to the damage caused by the locusts on food, as well as pastures for livestock. The UN agency warns the region is still at risk of a new upsurge occurring later in the year, especially with the new swarms coming from the Middle East. FAO noted that the significant progress has been made in fighting the desert locust in the region, with Kenya standing out among the countries that have posted major milestones. The number of counties infested by locusts has gone down to 2 from 29, more than half of the country at the beginning of the year. According to FAO, in Kenya, only 2 of the 29 counties that were infested in February have desert locusts today. In the coming days, we will drop to 1 county, and within 3 weeks, Kenya could be free of large-scale infestations altogether. That is a success, but the threat of possible reinfestation towards the end of the year will call for careful and continuous surveillance.
Yep. It's good news.
It is good news.
It is good news for very many of the farmers who are really worried. But also, like the FAO is saying, it has left some trail of devastation in those areas where the locusts visited.
And it's also an opportunity to be prepared because, there is a chance of them coming back.
Have they left completely?
No, not yet.
They're on their way.
They're on their way out. So 1 county left to go. By the end of this week, they should be
now
gone
up
completely.
there in Turkana, Samburu. In that region, they're heading out. Samburu, Turkana,
And where are they going?
South Sudan.
But you also must realize the weather patterns are changing. It's getting a little drier. The rains are essentially coming to an end in most parts of the country. And so they have no reason to be here because there's no new vegetation for them to rummage.
Yeah. Hey, okay. That's a nice happy story to start with.
It is.
Politicians now want nicknames on the ballots.
Nicknames in addition to the,
Like Ndu Noodles or co.
Yeah,
exactly. Not what are those things called? The matchbox, the flame, the elephant, the leopard.
Not symbols.
Not symbols. Yes. Yes. Look, that word just got lost completely. Looked for
house,
it. Looked
the
for
torch.
it. Looked for it. Saying what insignia? Nini. Kumbe simple. Symbol.
It's a symbol as a symbol.
I was so lost. I had no idea.
This is a
You
bill
think you
that
are lost?
it's a bill that has been proposed by Nyeri Senator Ephraim Maina, popularly known as Kirinyaga. And he's saying, you know what? In the community, people have these nicknames. People know you by your certain nickname, right? And then they go to the ballot and they find a name there. Movie, what was the other name? Mike Movie. Gideon Mike Movie. They wonder, so where is our
Where's
candidate? Sonko.
I thought that problem was supposed to have been, should we say, partially resolved by placing your picture. But then the truth of the matter is that picture, as it appears, it could be anybody.
Yeah.
Many men, if they shave, and meaning no facial hair,
Like 2 of you now, if you go and shave,
you
I'll run away.
you can say, hey, but this particular thing has very many female contenders.
Yeah. Well,
Why do they have male names? And the vice versa, of course.
and if you think about all the politicians that we know now, in the recent past, they've been forced to go and actually formally register these nicknames to be part of their names. Like this particular politician, Ephraim Maina, went and registered the name Kirinyaga. Now it's official. His name is Kirinyaga Ephraim Maina. Officially. Mike Mbuvi Sonko had to do the same.
This is
Baba
Ephraim
Yao
Maina.
had to do the same.
It is Ephraim Maina of Kirinyaga Construction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kirinyaga Construction. Baba Yao had to do the same. He had to call himself Baba Yao. Mwangi Wairia had to do the same.
Is there enough? Is there enough of confusion at the ballot?
Yes.
Because people really don't know
Yes.
who
People
the
don't know
individual
you.
is.
Yes.
So there've been increased numbers of people who got confused when they went to vote, essentially, because they didn't know who this individual was. That's interesting. They actually don't know the real name.
For instance, how many people do you think in this country knew that Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was also called Adonija?
Adonija.
And how many people also know that Jomo Kenyatta was actually Johnson Kamau? So
You would confuse people.
You're
thoroughly.
totally
they
confused.
would actually wonder who are these people. We thought,
Okay.
And then you're campaigning using that moniker nickname, Kimani Wamatangi, just because you've been supplying water tanks to people in the community. They call you Kimani Wamatangi. And they go in
That's
there
what
and
they know
wonder,
you.
So where is our Matangi guy?
where's the guy? There's a guy here called something or the other.
Yeah.
looks like him, but it's not quite the guy.
Sure.
Significant enough to do something about it, then I guess.
Actually, yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
Okay.
Do you support that move?
I do.
You think it's important?
I do.
So allow name alias.
Eric, for instance, if you happen to come from a village where people felt that they were only restricted to naming children baby and Baba, and so the village knows you as Baba, you go then ask for Eric. Who?
Daddy.
Daddy. No. Then you go Baba. Ah,
Boy.
Baba. They immediately they connect. So it's something that we've been actually. It's not new.
Boy.
But now that one, 50 years old boy,
Boy.
60 still boy.
Oh, boy is boy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's
so
called boy.
much for me. Wow. Okay.
So I think it is appropriate. This is a political contest, and you don't really want to leave anything to chance.
Yeah.
Well, okay, then in that case, I don't
And
think-
it serves the better purpose as not even going into the whole registrar of companies to change your name, and then you go back into all your other dealings where you registered your company as CT Muga, and now it has gone into the Kenya Gazette notice. The person known as CT Muga shall henceforth
Be known as
Adonija
Theophilus.
Theophilus.
at least.
And we wonder, okay.
So now, who are we dealing with?
No, it's important. It is useful.
I'll
It is
say.
useful. Yes.
It's one of those small things, but well, yeah. I mean, we lose nothing. Let them just agree and pass it. 6:30. It's a Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. We want to see what's happening on the roads, aka Barabara, aka Roadie.
Wow. Okay.
All right, and then we'll come back and look at other big stories of the day. Good morning.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise.
You're listening to Spice FM. Traffic.
All right, very light traffic this morning. It's not so terrible. We know that Thika Road will continue to be a problem today because the construction and the lifting of those footbridges still continues. Also, the road is closed right at the drive-in on your way towards the CBD. So you can use Mathare North to join the highway, or rather use the route towards Mathare North to join the highway if you're on Thika Road. So you must understand already, if you've not left yet, that the road right at the drive-in on your way to town has been closed this morning, and it's going to affect traffic. We already see that building up, getting to bumper status. Apart from that, coming off of Mombasa Road for now should not be too difficult for anybody. We know that it's going to build up in a short while, but we give you details of that. Getting into the CBD coming out of Westlands also shouldn't be so bad either. If it does get worse, we'll let you know as well. All right, we'll take a look in about half an hour and see how things may have changed or developed. Help us out also, Spice FM KE, whatever you see that can help somebody here or there, let us know.
Spice FM, Malindi. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
It's the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. The big stories of the day this morning. City, what do you have?
Well, there are many, but let me choose one which I think
Deserves a mention.
well, not really deserves the mention, but it points to a certain continuum. I'm looking at the headlines in The Nation. They say, revenue rebellion against Uhuru and Raila. A different wording, but we've heard there's a resonance of sentiments of this nature in the course of the week, beginning Monday, and it hasn't let up. It appears that we are not accustomed to vigorous debate. Let me explain why I say this. What would we rather? Hurriedly make a decision that we will be with us for the next 5 years and will be complaining and whining and going to court over, as opposed to taking a little time, even meeting for the 10th time, but getting a formula that then guarantees that when implemented, there'll be minimum noise, and there'll be some understanding that care has been taken, due discussions have taken place, and that the decision that is arrived at more or less has thrashed out some of the contentious issues that have been there, and this is perhaps the best option we have to move forward with.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
But there is some push by the leaderships of the parties, and this is Uhuru and Raila, who are the leaders of the big parties in the House, in a certain direction.
But that is normal in politics.
So, and then when their lieutenants appear not to heed to their, shall we call it, advice, then that could come out as rebellion, especially when it gets to a point where the Prime Minister is said to have held meetings, to have called, to have talked to people, to have said, former Prime Minister, ODM leader, is said to have had all these things, and then you still see on the floor of the House, MPs, a number of his MPs appear to be taking a different
If
route.
I didn't have a historical perspective on this matter, I would just agree with you and we'd move on. But if my mind goes back to the Kanu days, when you had one Sharif Nasir, you had people like Nahashon Juno, every once in a while, somebody would come up with just about the most far left perspective you could ever hear. And you'd wonder what on earth is going on. And with time, you realize that sometimes senior politicians or those in charge of senior political parties and influential political parties want to gauge what the public sentiment is. And just as they expect the lieutenants to fall in line and follow party lines, I would argue that it is also a possibility that you may want your lieutenants to actually, should we say, throw in a red herring. Throw the cat among the pigeons, so to say. See what comes out of it. Let's see how this thing sort of like builds up. And remember, the fact that there is a handshake, let's just understand it is a handshake. These particular animals did not change their spots or their tusks or their height. They are still politicians. And at the end of the day, they all are seeking one thing or the other. And even their alignment has to do with the vehicle that they think will get them where they want. So there is no politician who wants to appear, at least publicly, that they have made or they've been part of a decision-making process that doesn't benefit their citizenry.
Exactly.
This one they can do with very minimum fuss and injury to themselves, because just talking and agreeing. Thereafter, the narrative can take whichever direction they like. But where money is concerned, they'll fight tooth and nail to present themselves as the champions of their people when it comes to how much their people get. Yes. But you see, all this would be a lovely discussion if we're talking about the Kenyan politician in a mythical setting where they were unique in the sense that there were some of the few politicians on the planet who are known to look after the interest of their people and who are selfless and who will bend over backwards.
That's the background for this.
Yes. Then you would say, but we know that unfortunately is not necessarily not necessarily the case. So it brings in, yes, another debate. And what even muddies this water further is the history of what we have with our politicians. immediately you discuss this matter, there's now a discussion taking place in Parliament about bequeathing any retired MP 100,000 shillings a month.
For life. For the rest of their life.
Yes. These guys have been given an incentive to live for very long.
Please don't die, essentially.
And it doesn't matter whether you've served one term. Just because you've been elected for 5 years.
That's enough.
That's enough for you to...
Eric, they want to backdate this thing to 2010. Yes, that's the report in the papers. So against such a backdrop, when such a discussion takes place, you cannot blame Kenyans for thinking, okay, what are they really up to?
How far are those proposals, though? I think this is something that we can even discuss in greater detail. How far are the proposals for this maneno?
It's real maneno.
Well, it is a maneno. Well, the thing is this. They postponed and said, let's give time. Now, let's look at time. Time for what? Okay?
To sneak it back.
Time to renegotiate, time to change it, time to lobby. I think it's an amalgam of all these things. But the truth of the matter is such things require precisely that. It's a political decision that is being made, and it requires a political process. But the bit that I like, Eric, the thing that actually makes me happy is that we are actually debating this issue at great length. The postponement for me is an opportunity for further discussion on this matter. Even people who may not have heard of it or taken an interest, given the length of time it has stayed in the media and given the prominence it has been given, you have to ask. So you take an interest. And in taking that interest, you then ask the question, okay, it is this one we're having this debate over. What about the others that we have previously received? What about those ones? What happened to those ones? It's a right time for us, when we're querying what happened to the billions that were allocated to COVID, isn't it time to ask what happened to the trillions that were allocated to the county governments of Kenya?
Absolutely.
It's about time to ask all the questions. All the questions are important at any one time. The burden of our aging civil service. Now that we're talking about how we are paying pension and what is our government, how our government is functioning, 9 out of 10 civil servants are over the age of 46, and apart from owning smartphones, they hardly use the internet at home. And now the government services have almost ground to a halt after those above 58 and those with underlying medical conditions are forced to work from home. This is given proper prominence in the Standard this morning on page 4 and page 5 of the Standard, and it's basically raising that whole issue of how is our civil service looking like. Those between the ages of 19 and 35 are only 20%. Those 50 years and above are 35%. No, 50 years alone. 50 to 60, 11,879. 46 to 50, 11,739. 56 to 60, 12,057. More than 60, 399. So 86.3%, that is 41.1 million Kenyans are aged below 45. However, they make up only 10% of the civil service.
Too much.
Too
much? I'm asking.
Not really. The story actually doesn't begin there. The story begins with what you call the structural adjustment programs that the World Bank introduced. One of the things that is often highlighted is how it is that our country, we were encouraged to sell government assets. The thinking at that time, among other things, was that it wasn't the key function of the government to house its employees. So since these were assets,
dispose of
it
them.
was suggested strongly that we dispose of them. Then came in something else. Instead of continuing with this huge workforce, allow people to take what they called then a golden handshake and leave the service. People left the service at the age of 30, 35, even 40. When you could argue they were in their prime.
Yeah.
They were just getting the point where they were in. So that created a gap. So what it meant was those who had been, maybe a few people who were older took this opportunity. But if you give that particular scenario some 20 years, you would find that there are people, a good number are about to retire, but there's a gap. The gap in that people who could have taken over their jobs aren't quite there. What did we see? The government then raised retirement age. When the retirement age was raised, it then meant these people could continue working longer,
bit
in the
longer, yeah.
hope that these people who were supposed to take over would get time to mature and understand what needed to be done. Now, here we are today. We have reared a leopard, and we are beginning to wonder why this leopard is eating our goat.
Good.
Yes.
Okay.
It's
Those who are young then,
are now the ones who are 50 and above.
yes, they are.
But over time, we have not been able to replace them with sufficient numbers of the younger
haven't.
ones because
No,
we cannot
haven't.
let them go.
They were young, so they stayed longer.
They stayed.
Yes. And so the need to actually replace them didn't arise because they were young for a very long time. And it's only now that we realize that they're aging because they were. Unless there was an attrition that sort of like meant that, anyway, there wasn't.
Oh. I'm just trying to figure out, so where does this take us in terms of we have a very young demographic. This is what we're saying, 86% of our population is below the age of 45. We have a young demographic, but our public service is contains people who are of this older age, okay? And they're staying there longer. One is that you would assume that therefore the country would be able to take care of its elderly in terms of even paying pension and all, but when they get to retirement. But also there's the issue of this aging the workforce, the aging workforce that's not being adequately replaced by the younger people. So the majority are basically just being served by the minority once again, and the questions are not being addressed. Let's take a break and so that we can come back and look at that in greater detail at 6:45. It's a Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise.
You're listening to Spice FM. Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
It's 20 minutes to 7 o'clock. So we look at the big stories as we wind up on this one of the aging civil service. See, the other issues that emerge out of here is where you're talking about their access to internet.
Yeah.
We're talking about, and we've raised this question before, now that the government is working from home, are they able to work from home? And if then we're indicating that many of these people who are elderly, they have smartphones, yes, but it's not one of the things that they really want to do, using technology to work. Delivery of services.
Delivery of services, then it's compromised, yes.
It's a big one. I mean,
It would be. Remember that for the longest time, within the civil service, when you're senior enough, or mid-level seniority, you have assistants. So the sort of situation that would make it incumbent upon you to actually learn how to embrace technology doesn't actually arise because there are people who can do that for you.
They do it for you.
Yes. So now when you have a situation where it is actually being asked of you to do it, you'd think it's in the civil service. Just take a look across board and look at that demographic and ask yourself, how many people within that demographic have actually taken the time? Because it's time and bother to actually learn this, because understanding this, it's a new skill. How many have taken the time and bother to actually acquire the skills that are required beyond just using the phone
with changing times
and sending SMSs?
for sure.
Yes.
Very few would be the answer.
I have a story here.
You do?
An MP is in trouble because he ordered the construction of a 30 million shillings box culvert instead of a bridge.
Culvert for 30 million shillings. Was it a mistake?
Yep.
30 million. 30 million.
That's what the residents of Emurua Dikir constituency in Narok County have
30
put their
million.
legislator Johanna Ngeno in the spot for allegedly constructing a 30 million shillings culvert instead of a bridge that connects residents of Chebara village. The residents were holding demonstrations near the supposed bridge at Olol Masani ward, and they claimed that the MP was giving tenders to lazy contractors who end up denying them value for their tax. We have cried out for many years for a bridge to be constructed here so as to assist us access the main road. The MP promised us a bridge, but what we are seeing is a culvert that has been washed away by the recent rains. According to one of the residents, Betty Rono, the bridge located across River Mogor was supposed to connect Olol Masani and Mogondo wards. She says the lack of a bridge is putting the lives of the people at risk. The Kenya Rural Roads Authority resident engineer Joshua Musindani denied claims that the bridge was a constituency development fund project, saying the cost of the box culvert was actually 17 million shillings and not 30. It's a bit better.
Just a tad.
It's just,
Still.
it's about half.
It's a culvert for crying out loud.
It's a box
Actually,
culvert.
actually, even that 3 million you want to ask.
17 CT.
How many?
It was
17.
the
Was
actual
it-
cost,
was-
according to officials from the Kenya Rural Roads Authority, who are saying this. Listen, guys. So first of all, stop fighting your MP. Yeah? This is not the MP's job. This was not CDF. This was done by the Kenya Rural Roads Authority, and it cost us
Only
17 million. The MP has nothing to do with this project. The tender was awarded in Nairobi last year. The contractor is 90% done, although he's been slowed down by the heavy rains. And this resident
What sort of
engineer,
culvert is this?
the resident engineer is accusing the residents, the people there, of peddling lies.
You know, this is not a story that is unique to that part of the world. A similar problem arose in the Homa Bay County, somewhere near the county of what you may refer to as Rachuanyo. It was to do with the road. And residents were up in arms. And they kicked a fuss. No harm done, they simply demonstrated to actually show and indicate that this road, the area, a place called Kanjira, this road was supposed to connect two communities. And it was taking forever and costing forever. And then the rains came and it got worse. So even what they were able to do before, they couldn't. And I'm sure if you look around the country, you will find many such projects where somebody begins a project and it just never seems to go anywhere. But what goes somewhere, money just keeps being spent.
Somehow.
Yes.
The money is
Constantly.
spent.
Oh, the money is spent.
What
and
you want to see from it, it's
and it's not just
neither
money,
here nor
it's
there.
huge amounts
Of
of
money.
money. Huge.
So mistakenly constructed a culvert instead of a bridge. I'm wondering, all right, so was it?
Not mistakenly.
No.
No.
It was supposed to be a culvert.
Yeah. The contract awarded in Nairobi was
Was
actually
for a
for a
culvert.
culvert.
The
A
people
box
believe
But
that it was going to
17
be
million.
for a
culvert.
culvert for crying out loud. Come on.
17M.
No.
It's a bit steep, wouldn't you say?
It's 17 million.
Okay. Speaking about other amounts
It was
of
one
money-
culvert.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one.
It's one crossing.
Okay.
Other amounts of money. House helps cannot be fired without notice. We're going to be talking about this at 8 o'clock a little bit more in terms of, how this particular sector has been affected because of COVID, but then other things that they've been fighting for. However, before we get there, you have a reason to worry if you have been employing and dismissing house helps at will. You also have more reason to worry if your house help has been working on public holidays and weekends, not getting leave days, getting fired without a certificate of service, and earning less than 10,000 shillings per month. This follows a decision by Justice Duma Derry of the Employment and Labour Relations Court, which declared that it is illegal to just wake up one day and dismiss your house help without giving her, assuming it's always her, a 1-month notice of termination of her employment. It is unlawful to terminate the employment of a house help without giving her notice. It is also illegal and unfair labor practice to send a house help away without paying her any terminal benefits and not giving her a certificate of service. The same judge had just awarded 270,946 shillings to a house help who had been sacked for asking her employer for a raise. Justice Nderi made the decision in which Maureen Mohani challenged her sacking by her employer for asking for a salary increment, and she was awarded this amount for the unfair termination of her contract. According to the judge, employment laws state that you must give an employee, including a house help, a 1 month notice before sacking them, or in the alternative, pay them the equivalent of 1 month's salary. House helps have rates, and this is that you pay them a minimum of 10,107 shillings plus NSSF and NHIF, give them a 1 month notice before terminating employment, or pay 1 month's salary in lieu of notice. If you terminate employment, you must give them a certificate of service and terminal benefits. They should not work on public holidays and weekends and are entitled to 1 month's leave in a year.
There's a lot to digest. The conversation keeps rearing its head, every now and then. So we shall be discussing this in detail later this morning at 8 o'clock, 8 to 9, talking to somebody who's actively involved in seeking better terms and rights and recognition of domestic workers, and also
a
rights campaigner.
Yes, a rights campaigner fighting for this from the Kenya Human Rights Commission as well.
Hey, okay. This one should be interesting.
Yep.
Should be interesting. So shall we talk about what happened in Beirut yesterday? It was crazy. It's been all over social media. It's been all over the news, in local and international news. Updates so far. The president says that what we saw there was as a result of some 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that had been stored unsafely in a warehouse for 6 years. You saw that mushroom cloud?
Yep.
There were two blasts. Huh?
The initial one was the firecrackers, the fireworks. And then it spread into now 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate.
Then kaboom.
That was...
What on earth, how, which, when, why did it arise that that amount of explosives were stored in that
one place?
For such a long period of time?
For 6 years.
For such a long period of time.
And what were they planning to use those things for?
It's one of those things where maybe the government confiscates and impounds, and then it stays here, and the case is taking long, and then, you just assume. And you also forget very many other safety issues. For example, that there's a firecrackers store nearby.
Yes.
That there are this should be completely
And one
isolated.
firecracker igniting will ignite others.
Yeah.
But there's something that the BBC pointed out when this matter was being discussed ever so briefly. You see, one of the things that is a hallmark of that particular government in that country is they more or less mirror ours. And what I mean they mirror ours is you find that the politicians run the country like their personal fiefdoms. Corruption is at a level that is almost unparalleled. So the things that would benefit the citizenry are not a priority. Now, this negligence, unfortunately, it betrays the citizenry and the trust that they're supposed to have in their government. Now, this is the outcome. Do you really think that a government that was functioning well and knew how to ensure that safety measures are taken for everything that they do, would such a thing arise? The answer is no. If they were confiscated, they would have been disposed of, destroyed, whatever you do with these things.
Yep.
They were confiscated. Unfortunately, what happened is that the confiscating body did not take the precautionary measures to make sure that the storage was done properly, and that because there are ways to store things like this in a proper manner. It's done all over the world. There are ways to do this, and now we hear the Prime Minister saying that they will not relax until they find the responsible party. Now, when you talk about responsible party, it could be a number of things. Because what he was alluding to was that either somebody set it off
intentionally.
Or intentionally, And if it actually was an accident, then somebody did not take the responsibility to make sure that the adequate measures were put in place to make sure that it was stored properly. So either one, whether it was intentional or not, they're really looking to find out what happened. But you actually find that quite a number of Lebanese feel the first, that this was something that was intentional. They're used to having been in a state of chaos for the last 18 months. This has been the situation in Lebanon, and even years before that, where they were agitating for so much in terms of change in the hands of the government, young people coming out in terms of protesting and trying to make sure that there was some kind of change. So it was already quite a volatile situation. And then this having happened, you only kind of cement that sentiment in the minds of many Lebanese.
And by the way, you're talking about this injured, dead, against
4,000 injured, 78 dead because of
against a backdrop of COVID and a health system that is not straining, but
was already on its knees.
Thank
and
you.
they just come out of a 5-day lockdown. So
that was a devastating one. We're coming to the top of the hour. Keep it right here, because in the next hour we will be discussing other matters on the show. This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. Remember, we are live streaming on Spice FM KE, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Good morning. 7 o'clock.
Spice up your life. Traffic.
all right, it's on Long Road where we see there is traffic today. Right around the junction, huge traffic jam all the way to Posta for some reason, not being able to find exactly what the problem is at the moment. But Ngongoro is going to give us a little bit of problems as we try to then head down towards the city centre at the mortuary roundabout. It shouldn't be too terrible for too long though. Looking at Mombasa Road, coming out of Cabanas towards General Motors, it's going to be a bit of a clog up, at least just for a little bit. It shouldn't be too terrible after that. Okay, let terrible be the word that we use today. Thika Road, getting into the CBD using the Pangani underpass. Traffic is held up right at Muthaiga Corner, and we know that the road just at the drive-in also has been closed off. The construction continues in those areas. Kasarani Mwiki Road, that is also being worked on, some construction going on there, so it's causing some traffic. So little spots around the city, we'll take a look at it later, but for now you should be able to get where you're going without too much of a headache. You can also help us out here. You get stuck somewhere or you find an alternate, let us know. Spice FM KE on Twitter.
This is the Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric Latin, agent provocateur, the man in the chair, seasoned journalist, news hound, a man who believes in punching up, not down. This is the Situation Room, the only way to
Thank you very
start.
much for tuning into the Situation Room. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. This morning, we are discussing very many other things that we always do. This show airs every day on Spice FM, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on 94.4 in Nairobi, 87.9 in Mombasa, 102.5 in Kisumu, 96.0 in Nakuru, 96.7 in Eldoret, Nyeri, we're on 90.9, and Malindi, 97.7. We welcome our audience on KTN Home between now and 9 o'clock. Karibuni sana. C.T. Muga, what is today's proverb?
When you raise a leopard, you should not be upset when it eats your goat. This is a Sierra Leonean saying.
When you raise a leopard, you should not be upset when it eats your goat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sooner or later, that cute little leopard cub will become a fully fledged, marauding, flesh-eating. Leopards are not known to be herbivorous. And if you have goats in the same compound, same goats that they played with when this leopard was a cub, rest assured, when it's fully grown and its instincts are intact, it will guarantee it will eat a goat or two. So, do not be upset.
I think that proverb will find relevance in what we are about to discuss today, because we as Kenyans have been raising leopards, and we've also been keeping goats, or we are goats, probably one or the other. Fighting COVID-19 since the beginning of this year, the government has, been preparing itself towards the fight against COVID-19. From March, when the first case was declared in the country, the government has actually upped its effort in fighting COVID-19. A lot of money has been dedicated towards this specific fight, and this is addressing directly the issues that need to be addressed in the fight against COVID-19. Setting up bed capacity and improving our bed capacity, setting up isolation centers, quarantine facilities, buying PPEs for our healthcare workers, buying testing kits so that we have the capacity to test for this COVID-19. And a lot more has also been done, all right? Money has been set aside. We've gotten to a point where the government said, this is an emergency, so how do we procure these things quite fast and are able to have them delivered in the country very fast? How do we also seek support from our friends and development partners? And we've gotten a lot of support from the Jack Ma Foundation, from the Clinton Foundation, and others who have donated in kind or in cash towards this cause of fighting COVID-19. Questions have emerged over time of can we really account for all the money that has been earmarked for COVID-19 fight? Can we really account for all the donations that we've received in the country? Stories have emerged of how the Jack Ma Foundation donations arrived at JKIA and found their way out of JKIA unprocedurally, and they haven't been accounted for. People wondering, so who is it that cleared this consignment? Did it end up in government quarters as it was supposed to? Did it end up in private hands? Questions emerged then. Questions have also emerged on the procurement of some of this equipment that's required. The equipment, the PPEs. Who has won the tenders? Who was supplied? Did they have the capacity? Did they go through proper procedure of vetting for them to win the tenders? Those are questions that have really, really emerged. And clearly, we have people who have benefited from this windfall, and now we call them the COVID billionaires. There's a story in The Nation this morning that's basically just looking at firms that ripped big from lucrative tenders in just 3 counties of the Nyanza region. Siaya, we have 6 companies there. Kisumu, 2 companies. Homa Bay, 7 companies. And you're talking about 159 million shillings, the amount that the Kisumu County received from the national government just recently to fight COVID-19. The other day we were talking about how other counties have also gone through the procurement process of getting this money. And people are...
And yesterday, Eric, we had this issue at the national level where we learned of huge amounts of money that had been awarded to companies who simply didn't have the capacity to supply.
Yep.
And is now being replicated in the counties. And what is also of interest when you talk about donors in this fight against COVID, they are also local donors. They are unsung, they are unmentioned. But local organizations, individuals coming up to also lend their hand and giving monies towards this cause. And the question that of course arises is, the issues that are being raised, are they facetious? Are they real? Do they deserve being raised? Because the response from the individuals within these county governments and the national government who are responsible for this, they all seem to say the same thing. The money was used for the purpose it was intended, and we can account for all of it. And that seems to be the statement that's supposed to cover a multitude of misfortunes. But to actually present something that is viable, remember, last week we were discussing something simple, an audit, an inspection that the president occasioned to determine the effectiveness and the preparedness of the counties with regards to COVID. And a report given by the gentleman who heads the Union and the Assembly of Governors differed very, very sharply from this. Their report was that only 21 counties were not ready. The president's inspection team told us with clarity that only 5 were ready. And the same story is replicated. The bed capacity, you hear stories, and it's the same story all over. Beds were borrowed from schools, from dispensaries, from this institution. Meaning, the capacity they're talking about has nothing to do with what they reported as having spent this money in buying. Because they also don't say that they leased. They say, no. They simply took, after all, the schools, the dispensaries as we are within their counties. So, this falsehood that has dominated the conversation, in my mind, justifies any and every question that can be asked regarding this matter.
It always is that once you leave room for speculation, and the way in which you do that is by not answering upfront or by not giving information about what really is happening. And because you're going to make this conversation public on a daily basis, which has been done from the very beginning, then guess what? Everything else about the conversation also then has to be public, it has to be true, it has to be honest. It might be far-reaching to ask that a government gives details of exactly what is going on when it concerns funds, but then when it also concerns the health of its citizens, then it is just as important. All right, so you might want to ask if they give an audit and they give a report and say, all right, the money that we received, it actually went to what it was intended for, and we have evidence of the same. But then you want to ask yourself the question, can the amounts that have been spent be translated into reality? Let's give an example. The county of Kisumu received 159 million shillings from the national government for COVID preparedness. All right. So all of these other things fall, all of these things fall under this preparedness that we're talking about. Preparation in terms of beds, preparation in terms of PPEs for health workers, whatever it is across board. If you did a spot check in Kisumu County, can you see this money then being translated into actual tangible resources that would be there for the fight against COVID? If you can't, that's where the question comes in.
Actually, the question is even bigger and louder than that. This 159 million shillings is just part of the 5 billion that was allocated to counties for the fight against COVID-19.
Yeah.
The counties themselves had already allocated some budget, some of their own budget towards this. Kisumu had already allocated 200 million shillings from their own budget in the fight against COVID-19. So 200 million plus 159 million, we are talking about around 360 million shillings for fighting COVID-19. And this, therefore, has been spent between March and now.
By the
And
way,
unfortunately, Kisumu is one of those counties that was not prepared in terms of just bed capacity. Let's not even talk about anything else. Bed capacity, they fell in that bracket of counties that were actually not ready when it came to the report that was handed over to the super duper team.
Yep.
What was that, right?
Yep.
So this actually did not happen. So this is the problem, because then you start to raise questions in the minds of people. And so then you leave people's mouths dropped in surprise when you're asking the question, then okay, that's what makes sense. Then you start to say, that's why we have under 400, that's why we have under 350,000 tests being done around the country. That is why then health workers are ready to down their tools because they're not enough in terms of PPEs. These have not been granted to them. That's why people will be turned away, because they don't have the resources to take care of this. Where did the money go?
well, if we were to quote what the Kisumu County Health Chief Officer is, should we say, alleged to have said, says, we use the funds for the purpose they were meant for, and we have nothing to hide. Where this comes in, I don't understand. The procurement process was fair and competitive, and yet, according to the report in The Nation, one company, there are others, but this one stands out. Hella Intimates EPZ Limited. It was paid. And this story is replicated in other counties as well. You find a company has been prepaid to supply face masks, surgical gloves, and it turns out they couldn't supply. So, one of the requirements that any procurement process requires, there's a financial bid, apart from the technical bid. You're required to show your financial capacity. So it is assumed that if it was fair and competitive, they showed a financial capacity. Did they? Did they? Because if you actually showed the financial capacity, it means there's also documentation that you get from the bank that indemnifies you and says, yes, indeed, this person can do. So how does it therefore arise that, forget, this is intended for you to actually supply and then get paid. But here you have a situation where the opposite has happened. You have been paid to supply, and yet you have a problem with supply. The truth of the matter is this. Remember this 5 billion, if you look at what it was intended for, it was actually meant for infrastructural development so that the capacity of the counties could be enhanced. It has nothing to do with other monies that donors had given that had also gone out. No, this one was specific for that. Make sure that the capacity is enhanced. Yet you'll hear the same story being replicated in Embu. You'll hear it being replicated in Kirinyaga. When the county assemblies ask those questions, there's silence, because the capacity that they were supposed to have reached has not been met.
What was very obvious with the COVID fight, and I mean, we discussed this very many times on this show, and everybody in the country knew that you were going to have people who would benefit from the procurement process, and you're going to have people who would now become billionaires, which is okay, because you're going to spend money to fight COVID.
It is a business opportunity.
It's a business opportunity for any business person who sees the opportunity. That is not the problem. The problem is when those business opportunities are unscrupulously taken advantage of, right? So somebody gets money and they're supposed to supply 10 beds of a certain capacity, certain specifications. They supply 1 bed,
and then go
which
and
does
borrow
not even
some
meet
bed from a school.
specification, and they are paid 100% for that. Somebody is awarded a tender. They were supposed to at least demonstrate that they are capable of providing or supplying whatever they are being given a tender to supply. That we can even assume that, it's an emergency. We didn't have anyone who had been pre-qualified for supplying PPEs in this country. So really, so we just went and said, all right, come, do you have the capacity? And you say, yes, you have the capacity. You're given the job so that you supply raka. I mean, we have an emergency we're dealing with. But there's no due diligence that's happening there. There are no checks and balances that have been put in place to ensure that this company that has been awarded this is going to be able to supply before we pay off. It points back to showing that there's a scheme. This was a well-orchestrated scheme to steal from the people.
So then I find myself thinking that the day, March 13th, as it were, that around that time, the scheme had already played out in people's minds, and they said, this thing is coming to Kenya.
Yep.
We must be ready. Now, the readiness that they were talking about was totally different from the one that we're making noise about here when CT were talking about Bagavi Hospital, 120 beds till I see it. That was a different kind of readiness that they were speaking of. They wanted to be ready to be able to supply whatever it needed to be supplied, whether it was going to meet standards, whether it was going to be up to scratch in terms of what was needed. That was neither here nor there. Because at the end of the day, this is business that has presented itself to me raw-eyed, belly up, ho-ha. And I'm ready to go with it. Whatever it is that we need to take, we'll go. But it's really then unfortunate because, like we say, it shows the soft underbelly of things.
But this isn't business.
And this is not the first time that something like this has happened. And I dare say neither is it going to be the last time.
It isn't business. Eric has got it right. This is theft. You must distinguish the two.
From the point of view of the individuals who are entering into this, it is business.
It's theft.
From their point of view,
no. They're very clear about what they're doing.
Do you think that they sit amongst themselves and they say, okay, yes, let's go and steal?
Yes.
No. But for
they
them,
do.
No, you're not understanding what I'm saying.
Okay, let's hear you.
From their point of view, they're not sitting and saying, I am going to steal. They are saying that my company has an opportunity to get into business here because of COVID.
No.
Actually, no, my sister.
You wake up tomorrow.
These are hard-eyed thieves.
You go and register a company. Mm-hmm. You find your way into a KEMSA or the county government. You present the credentials for this company, knowing full well that you have got connections inside, right? The tender committee. You win the tender and you say you're going to supply X amount of PPEs, knowing full well you don't have the capacity to supply.
You don't even know what you're
You
supposed to
ask
apply
for
looks
money
like.
to be paid to you, knowing full well that you are not going to be able to supply. What is that? Theft.
Yes,
It's not at a
we
business
agree.
opportunity.
We have
There are those that
agreed.
have seen the business opportunity, like the young men that we saw, who are coming up with beds, like those that we've seen who are trying to come up with ventilators. Those ones are looking at it and saying,
That's business.
business, maybe I can supply. Somebody who's registering a company today and winning a tender tomorrow and getting money and not being able
Zero capacity
All
as
to
per our
supply.
procurement requirements. Zero capacity.
Exactly.
that one is a thief.
Yes, we know that is a thief. That's what I'm telling you. But for where they sit, from where they were preparing it from, it was an opportunity for them to make money. It is
Yes,
not
not
yes, that's what I'm
business.
saying. It was an opportunity for them to make
steal money.
Yes, we can see it very clearly what it is.
do you
We
know-
see it very
Do you
clearly.
know why we're
for what
splitting
it
hairs
is.
here, Ndu?
We-
Huh? You seem to be giving them a little leeway.
No.
And
I'm
you keep
not.
throwing the
I'm-
word business.
No.
Business
I'm
doesn't
not giving-
feature here.
I'm not giving them a leeway at all. I'm telling you that it is so warped that they see
In
that
their minds.
the way it is so warped in their minds that the way they see it is like they could possibly be making.
By
some
the way, it
money.
isn't warped.
I think from the very beginning,
They
in
kn-
their minds,
they know exactly what they're
they
doing.
know
To steal.
exactly, yes. They have no confusion at all that, you know what, this is honest business. I'm getting
No.
into honest business. Absolutely not.
Oh no.
This is somebody who's waking up thinking,
Here is an opportunity for me
kuna
to get
billions,
money.
tutakula.
here.
Now, what are you going to do? We're going to CCT. You can do those things, and they look like face masks.
Yes, we
shall
can.
supply.
Yes.
Bas.
And this
About
surgical-
whether it's business or no way.
Who supplies a surgical gloves? Okay. Find out how many. Look.
I can get them for 10 bob, so let's quote 150.
Yes.
That is theft.
That's not business. And by the way, remember you're dealing with people who've been. This isn't something that was hatched yesterday. Even before COVID, they've been doing it with the funds that are intended for health purposes.
No, not even just health.
It's-
For everything, anything
Yes,
else across board.
It's a
Not just
well
health.
it's a well rehearsed act. It's just that you bring in new players into it to do the same thing. Would our health system be in such woes if they had actually been doing the things they were supposed to do? Would it be? The answer is no. Every year it's budgeted for. Every year money is allocated. Right now, this same region, we have a problem with doctors. Doctors gave notice for a strike. Doctors don't strike because they have nothing to do with their time. They've talked, they've complained, they brought up the issues, nothing has been done. They figure, and a little industrial action might help bring this point home. It doesn't give doctors any pleasure to see patients suffering and dying. It doesn't. But unfortunately, they are often pushed to the point where they say, you know something? I think these fellows have take these things for granted. They don't seem to understand. If the doctors understood there was no money, the discussion would be different. But there is money. Where? The same story we're asking. Where does this money go? Because it's budgeted for every year. It's not as though the workforce within the health sector increases by 100% every year. It doesn't. So, what you're dealing here, or rather what we're discussing here, is how theft within the health sector, and specifically during this COVID area. Now, what is shocking to me is that somebody has gone and sat on their conscience, that is, if they ever had one, buried it deep somewhere, and doesn't seem to understand that in the annals of theft, this is probably the worst thing you can do. Money intended to save lives. That's what COVID money is intended for. Save lives. Not buy blankets, save lives. And you find it perfectly okay to steal the money. Pity, I don't know how to curse, and I don't know how to prefer curses on people. I'm not even sure it works. But
Some might say differently.
and neither am I going to wish ill on anybody. But may your deeds find you out. And may the consequences that come with such deeds also find you out. Because this is not just theft. This is what falls under the category of killing people. It's crime against humanity. Anybody who dies as a result of COVID in these areas that we're talking about, all these places that are unprepared, the people who are in this health sector and the people who are involved in procurement, it's on your head.
The thing is that it has become so normalized. Look, and if you want to look at the Ministry of Health, we heard the CS, for example, refer to it as this place inside here,
Yeah.
Mafia House.
Yeah.
Mafia House did not get its nickname because of COVID. This
No.
is something that was there before, right? It has become so normalized that it's something that can be had in a conversation and nobody sees it as anything different.
We have been rearing a leopard.
Absolutely. And now it is eating the goats.
Yes.
It's eating the goats.
We come back
This is
here
what
and
is going on.
in fact, if you look at these stories and the conversations that happen on social media, even people trying to deduce, okay, so who is this person who's registered as the owner of this company? What is their family tree looking like? What is their connection to the powers that be? All these conversations, people don't really act shocked. They act, sort of pissed off. And they're like, but we expected this anyway. I mean, it's like we knew that we were rearing
That's a bad
leopard.
situation to be in.
This is where we are. We have known for a long time that this is expected to happen. So when the story emerges that, they are COVID billionaires, we're like, we knew. So let's just see who they are now this time. This
Are
company,
they the usual suspects?
Are they the usual suspects?
Or are they new ones?
Yeah. Same guys.
But you know what is of interest? If the story was supplies were made, they were reasonably priced, you might talk about conflict of interest.
Yep.
But this one, my friend.
It is total theft.
Yes, the whole caboodle. Yani, it wasn't supplied. If there was an attempt, it is not the right product. Yes. Any ill that you can place in the way of describing what happens. Were they prepaid? Yes. Were they prepaid in full? Yes. Did they supply? No. What did they supply? Things that nobody needed. Did they supply? Yes. What? They had expired. Goodness. You.
Another one. Did Jack Ma donate? Yes. Did our
donate a
embassy in
second time?
Beijing receive these things? Yes.
Yes.
Did the Beijing embassy send these things to Kenya?
Yes.
Did they arrive at JKIA? Yes.
Yes.
Twice.
Did they go to the places that they were supposed to have gone to? No.
In fact,
Is it possible that any Tom, Dick, and Harry could walk into JKIA and say, clear a consignment that's meant to be for government of Kenya? Absolutely not. And here we are. There's not even a conversation that we have on a daily basis. Nah. You're like, Jack Ma's donations. Oh, they
There
were
was
stolen.
something like that.
Oh, okay.
And it's normal for you to kind of like say, all right, let it just, out the window. And that's the thing.
by the
I
way-
think we should actually be a little bit more than jostled when it comes to things like this being normal. We're not talking about 2 shillings here. And there you go. We're not talking about a life lost is a life too many to something like this. Right now, what are we talking about? There are delays because test results cannot come out.
Yep.
People are trying to get to hospital and there's not enough space.
Our capacity for testing, zero. Well, wanting, not zero. Our capacity to secure
Accommodate
and
those-
accommodate people, wanting. Our capacity to protect our healthcare workers, wanting. Why? And a lot of money has already been spent.
And money has already been spent.
Yeah, let's take this quick break. 26 minutes after 7 o'clock. This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation on Spice FM and KTN Home. We will be back shortly, 26 minutes after 7. We want to take a look at the weather and traffic. Good morning.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah.
You're listening to Spice FM. The weather with Spice
Mostly cloudy
FM.
in Nairobi at 14. We'll see highs of 24 and lows of 12 today. Partly cloudy conditions to continue throughout today. It's partly cloudy in Nakuru at 13. Highs of 23 and lows of 12. Showers expected soon. And in Nyeri at 14 degrees. Highs of 22 and lows of 13 with a sprinkle expected later. Eldoret, thunderstorms. Highs of 18 and lows of 12. Mostly cloudy conditions this morning at 13. It's 21 degrees in Kisumu. Mostly cloudy conditions. Highs of 27 and lows of 18. In Kakamega, it's mostly cloudy at 16, highs of 24 and lows of 15 with a shower or two expected. Highs of 28 in Mombasa with a shower expected. The rains came in early and have stopped for now, but will come in later. Lows of 23. Malindi is mostly cloudy at 25, highs of 28 and lows of 24 with showers later on. All right, let's take a look in Kampala where it's mostly cloudy at 18, highs of 26 and lows of 17 with showers expected soon. Mostly cloudy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Mostly cloudy conditions will continue with highs of 30 and lows of 22 through the day. In Johannesburg at 7 degrees, it's a bit chilly this morning. Highs of 21 and lows of 6 with sunny conditions all through the day. And finally, for now in Lagos, it's partly cloudy at 23. Temperatures will drop. Highs of 29 and lows of 23 with partly cloudy conditions through this Wednesday.
Traffic.
Right. It's a sandwich on Thika Road. The drive-in, we know that road has been closed, guys, so we need to use an alternative today. It's going to be a mess if everybody keeps coming in that direction. So let's give the announcement now. You can spread far and wide. The road just at the drive-in on Thika Road has been closed. So you can't get in and you can't get out, unfortunately. You can use the service lanes, though, because that construction still continues to take place. On Mombasa Road, coming out of the JKIA turnoff and then heading towards Cabanas and all the way down towards General Motors, moving at a snail pace this morning, but you should be fine after that. It's going to get clogged up a little bit right around Bellevue, but then it should be opened as you get to the Nyayo Stadium roundabout, and then you continue your journey of the jam on Uhuru Highway all the way through to Westlands. It's going to happen all the way through traffic hour today, but you should be fine after that. Thika Road, we know right around Muthaiga, it's also slowing down just a little bit. Limuru Road past the Village Market and then heading down into the CBD should not be too terrible. Don't forget, let us know what you see. Spice FM KE.
Sugar and spice and everything nice. Everything nice. Spice FM.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM.
In the room this morning is Eric Latif, C.T. Muga, and Eziokubundu Oko.
Okay.
Noodles,
Yo.
aka Ndu. We are discussing the COVID billionaires, and this is something we know that we expected to see. Once we had COVID declared a national emergency in the country, and this was a medical emergency, a couple of things were set in motion. One is that we needed to have emergency funds released so that we can address this. And initially, it was the Ministry of Health that was handling all this with the National Treasury, using the national government infrastructure and structures. For example, the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, which is mandated to supply medical equipment and drugs for all health facilities countrywide, was taking the bulk of this. And then at some point, the government decided to allow county governments to go ahead and directly procure either from KEMSA or from any other agency that they were able to. Another loophole. So county governments now started, deciding what are we going to do in order to build our capacity. Is it building extra beds and extra bed capacity, procuring beds, or is it even getting ventilators and such, and oxygen and PPEs for our people? We have seen very many county governments going out and dishing out PPEs and saying, we're giving masks to everybody because we need this. We also saw county governments going about fumigating markets and roads and towns and shopping centers and saying, this is how we are fighting COVID-19 by fumigating this. All that means money. Now we are getting to a point where questions are starting now to emerge and information is starting to emerge on how all this procurement was happening. Questions are emerging on how some of these companies won the tenders to provide some of these services or goods to the counties. A company that was registered within a month has won a tender for millions of shillings, tens of millions of shillings, has no capacity, has no known record, has no known history of being able to supply some of these things, and then it ends up being the truth that they actually cannot supply. Theft, direct, well-intentioned theft. And I mean well-intentioned theft, as in that is what was basically intended to be.
You know, there was a time it was a one-off. You got shocked when you heard of such things. But we asked, at what point did it acquire this characteristic of being a normalcy, if I may call it that? It's become commonplace. Remember yesterday we were talking about land that belonged to the meteorological department, which was annexed by some unscrupulous people. Same MO, meaning company set up specifically so that this land can be allocated. Decades later, this matter is still being discussed in court. A judge says, no, excuse me. No. This thing was not correctly allocated, wrongly.
Yeah.
And goes into the details of why this was the case. As I said, this was in the 1980s. It was a one-off. But the issue of theft in this country, especially the brazen theft of government resources, has become the norm. In short, wrong has become right. You know, as we're thinking about this, my mind went, what do these people want to do with this money? Let me explain why I asked the question. Let's say you buy 10 cars.
Yep.
Then, let's say you build God knows how many blocks of flats, because that seems to be the way people invest. Then, let's say you buy shares. Then, because a day will come, and this one comes even sooner than you think, when this matter will get to the papers and your name will be there. And guess what? Your entire family will be in the spotlight. Children who had no clue that their parent was a thief suddenly realize that the parent is the thief. And not only your children, their friends also realize that so-and-so's father or mother is a thief.
Right, and then they get to wear they get to wear the scarlet letter then, essentially for the rest of their lives.
Yes, you do.
And unfortunately, when you look at things like this, and you start to think to yourself, people who have an opportunity to actually make good for the citizens of the country, unfortunately, have taken the opposite direction. And you know what? We've seen a case just recently where two individuals, for having, promised air in terms of storage for maize, for example, now have to serve time, and their families in one case have had to come in, right, and raise money for them.
Hundreds of
It reached 800 million. Now you tell me, how old is this case?
We're talking about 15 years. Their friends, their families have to come in, raise money so that they don't have to go to jail for the rest of their lives, right? But then who asks the question on the other side? Public funds. Because we often ask ourselves, okay, because it's become so normalized, you now say, all right, 159 million, no big deal. It's not a big deal. But then try to imagine in a county that lacks schools, that lacks health facilities, now that we're talking about COVID, that lacks proper roads, what could 159 million shillings do to uplift the profile of one county? What could it do? And I think that's the question that we must be asking ourselves. It's not that the money has gone. It's that what could the money do? And once we're able to paint the picture in our minds of what stolen funds could actually do for certain parts of a country, there I think is now when you're able to make the connect and talk about things like corruption and grand theft and how then it can actually make a difference. Because right now people are removed. Money was stolen, all right. It was supposed to be for PPEs. Okay, we didn't get them. But then COVID ended, and then that kind of flew out the window. But then imagine all the funds that have essentially gone down the drain. What could they have done for the country? Once you make that connect, I do feel that people will begin to then resonate with then how terrible and how deep, dark a hole this corruption thing is.
Actually, much as you're my sister and I really like agreeing with you, permit me to differ with you on this one just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask yourself what preoccupies the mind of a common and ordinary citizen, health is not a priority.
Until they get sick.
Yes. And even then, they will postpone seeking treatment because treatment has a cost element to it. The priority of most people is simply to stay alive. No other complications attached to it. Just stay alive. Make sure that A, B, C, D takes place.
Mm-hmm.
So the concern that we are saying they ought to have, they should, and they ought to. But if you understood the poverty levels that the vast majority of our citizenry have, you'd understand that what we are discussing is something that ought to continue being discussed and talked about for them to actually grasp and say, you know, this is not someone stealing. This is someone stealing from you.
This is not just somebody taking something that's next to you,
No,
CT,
it's
but
yours.
let's even go a little bit further.
Yes.
This is somebody actually then opening your mouth, right? And essentially the food that you were on the way to swallowing, they're actually taking
taking
it
it
out
back,
of your
yes.
mouth and then using it for something else, recycling it, regurgitating it, doing whatever that they want to do with it. It's getting that bad. That's where it's getting to. Because you can look at the list of these companies, for example, in just one region and ask yourself, okay, procurement wasn't done properly. You look at companies that don't even have the capacity then to be able to supply such, but then it was let go. And at the end of the day, yes, somebody has stolen. Somebody has stolen. You're saying now, for example, that city people are worried about food every day, survival, right? Can you imagine what
Basics.
would have been done with 159 million shillings in Kisumu County for people who are vulnerable?
You know, I get a sense sometimes that we as Kenyans are completely removed from government and what government is. Right? So government is this other entity, that other body that sits there, and people who go there are going to grab from the government, not stealing from us. They're taking from the government.
Don't realize that it's actually you.
We have absolutely no
We've
connection
disassociated
between,
ourselves completely
from government. So this whole thing that you're saying that this person has stolen from us, no, this person has stolen from the government.
And the government is?
them.
It's them.
But in reality, who's the government?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
no.
The reality is
us.
Is us.
We are all the government, but
and that's why you'll find that all
actually,
these
the
companies that have been
reality-
mentioned here and all the others that will emerge, right? And people, if you go to the villages, you'll be told, CT, his own was doing the PPEs the other day for COVID. The guy made money. See that house he built? He made some good cash. That person is not seeing that money could have sorted him out health-wise or anything. No. It is that CT is our hero because he went, he hunted, and he brought.
So he
And
said
we can
it's
see.
hero worship as opposed to calling out something that was done which was wrong.
This is how we are. And that's why I keep saying that today's proverb by CT, not by CT, today's proverb
By the Sierra Leoneans.
by
The Sierra Leonean saying,
which CT is
yes,
told us,
highlighted, yes.
we have been rearing leopards, and then we sit back and we start complaining when our goats are eaten. But we still do not want to let go of the leopard
And you see, we glorify theft.
completely.
You hear alitafuta.
Yeah.
The guy is a thief. He's stealing na lakini anajua kutafuta.
Anajua kutafuta.
You know theft is
Anajuana na watu.
theft is actually an accepted virtue in this country. I know the word vice exists, but I'm telling you, it is an accepted
It's a virtue.
virtue. If you don't steal, you're considered the idiot. What is wrong with you? It's an opportunity. Why didn't you take it?
This guy has worked at the county assembly for how many years now? Not at he elected. He works there. He's a clerk in the county assembly. And look, he's still driving a small car.
Which doesn't work half the time. And look at so-and-so who just joined recently.
Yeah.
Look at how they're living. Now, you see, I've mentioned this in this station before. We actually are worshippers of materialism. We may not think so, but that is our God in this country. That's the God on whose altar we actually worship and pray. And that is why we can talk until, what color might we turn? Deep purple, perhaps?
Something.
Yes. Crimson? Yes. Scarlet? Yes. But the truth of the matter is this. Until people understand that this God they're worshipping is a false one, they still seem to think that this is a good God to worship. Because do the thefts, look at what the ethics and anti-corruption are doing. Look at what these here, look at what the government agencies are actually trying to do. You would think there'd be a halt. No! Mm-mm. It's like shift gears. And if this car only has 5 gears, look for which has 7. Theft isn't decreasing in the country, it's increasing. And something that is of human interest and something that concerns us and is a life and death issue like COVID, that isn't seen as something that should be attended to so that lives can be saved. It's seen as an opportunity to make even more money. So our focus and our God is money, materialism.
So even in the individuals who may be caught out, for example, I mean, after 15 years, and we talked about it here, and we said that, okay, what would actually stop, or what would actually, stop people in their tracks and have a think about, even putting your hands in the cookie jar.
The
And we said
community.
that if an individual then was arrested and charged and brought before, that would be a deterrent, and it would stop people from actually putting their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. But like you're saying, it doesn't. It really it doesn't seem to.
We
Because
know, and we
people
can
will now
clearly
find
tell
an
that this is
alternate route.
somebody who has benefited from stealing. From
We know.
Yeah.
We know. And what do? We make them chairman of the church. We make them the guest of honor in the next Harambee that we have. What do? We want to worship them whenever they invite us for Nyama at their place this weekend, because we are doing a housewarming for this new humongous house. We are so happy that we have been considered in the invitation
Worthy.
list. Worthy to be invited. We are so happy. We go in there and we sit down. You're like, how he takes us around. I brought in these doors from I don't know where. This is not just any
And
other
it's not
mahogany.
just any tree.
It's not just any tree.
Redwood that is 350 years
Bas.
old.
And you're like, wow. We worship them. The moment we stop doing that, the moment we realize that, well, this person has started working here and this is their change in lifestyle, and we start questioning and saying, I do not want to be associated with you because I can clearly see that you are stealing. The moment we do that, things are going to change. Right now, what are we doing? Oh, you have been arrested, you've been taken to court.
Our person.
They're not nice.
Case goes, judge declares you guilty of fraud, of defrauding the Kenyan people hundreds of millions to the tune of billions of shillings. What is the fine? 1 billion. Okay, wacha tufanye harambe. Tusaidie huyu. Your own family is contributing money to get you off.
What does it tell you? Your
What does that
family
say?
they benefited from
Yes.
whatever activities you're involved
And they're
in.
okay with it. And in fact, all of them want to find a way of stealing. They just replace you because you still have the networks, but now your name is tainted. Just introduce
somebody
me.
else.
Yeah, I will do the same. Until all of us decide that this is a leopard and we do not want to have a leopard in our compound, this corruption that we're talking about,
We'll just be talking to
it.
ourselves, actually.
get it.
It won't come to an end. We extol it. We call it even a virtue. It's considered a good thing. People call it a deal. It's theft. You actually wonder, what stops someone from actually supplying what they're supposed to supply, the quantity and the quality they're supposed to supply, and then making money? That's business. Ours don't. You avoid supplying what you're supposed to supply, and if you do, it is substandard. It is something that doesn't even approach the likelihood of what was supposed to have been supplied. And then to make it even worse, you are prepaid. So you cannot even say that you didn't have the capacity, because once you're given the money, you have the capacity. And even then, you still don't supply, which means you never intended to supply. But you intended to take the money. And if we were to look across the counties, I'm sure we'd find this story replicated again and again and again and again and again. Isn't it about time that our churches started questioning? Someone comes to donate money, tell them, brother, sister, we are grateful, but we do need to know exactly where it is you get your money from. We are happy that you have considered us. It would be good if we knew. Because you cannot wash away theft by donating, or by suddenly you've stolen billions and then you are the benefactor of a school, you're the benefactor of... It doesn't quite work that way.
I keep giving this example of, consider this, let's just say, a young man called, give me a name.
John.
I was thinking of my name, then I realized I'm not young.
Let's
call John.
Let's use John. So John is this young man in the village who has just become a delinquent. And everybody in the village knows this is the guy who steals the chicken. This is the guy, if you leave your clothes hanging, he'll come and pick the clothes. Everybody in the village knows, including his own homestead. Whenever the homestead has some event and guests from Nairobi have come, somebody is actually assigned to look at John and observe John's movements throughout.
Police marking.
Police marking of John, because we do not want John to go and steal from our guests. Right? And embarrass us and tarnish our
What
family
Kenyans
name.
call aibu ndogo ndogo.
Aibu ndogo ndogo. So make sure John asisumbue wageni, John asiitishe pesa, John asiibe handbag ya mtu. All right. That is what, and everybody knows and understands this is what John is. Same John, a couple of weeks later, leaves the village and goes to some urban area.
And there's a sigh of relief.
Yes, and the people are like, hey, John alienda up. Yeah, John alienda. John is not seen or heard of 6 months, a year. That next Christmas, John drives home for Christmas in this swanky little car.
Little.
Swanky, beautiful, big, humongous car. John comes and people start saying, hey, hey, John, hey, umekuja, hey, how are you? People's view of John changes.
Suddenly want to be associated with John.
You don't know where John went to, and it's only been 8 months, and John is back here driving a big car, and John, okay. Next thing, John, you hear that when John left after Christmas, he actually left his mother 100,000 shillings because he wants to build a house now, for the mother. House comes up within 3 months, house is done by John. Next thing, you know what's going to happen? The nearby church, the mother's church, is going to invite John as guest of honor in the next Harambee that they have.
Same John.
They do not question where John suddenly got this
The
money
windfall.
from. The story of John does not change. It's the same John who was stealing chicken, but now he is driving a big car, he is building big houses. So John is an important
And
person.
wearing
in
a
the
nice
community.
suit.
Yes. And this is how we behave as a community, as a society. So if you ever discover that, oh, John, you are kwa hii list ya watu wali COVID billionaires.
Okay.
Hey, that guy was, I wonder who he knew. I hear he was called by that uncle of his. You know that uncle of his has connections. And that's how you pass it on and you excuse it. And you're like, hey, John, now at least we have someone here who has this money.
Essentially, you are accepting he has stolen on your behalf.
Yeah. He's
And
our
it's
hero.
okay.
This association that we talk about then, because really, the hero worship is not just because you see somebody and you like. There's something then that appeals to you as an individual. There is something in terms of a hope that perhaps the trickle-down effect will then affect you. That maybe being associated with this individual, there's something that you could get. Now, if you want to take a couple of steps back, how desperate has it become that somebody then, clothed in robes of riches, comes to you later and you suddenly associate yourself with them because you're hoping that there's something that they can then give you or a connection that they can then now make with you, because that's it.
Yep.
It's not that you just want to be this person's friend. There is something that you also hope that you can get from them. That's it.
Yep.
So how desperate have people become to the point that whatever it is that you're not able to do on your own, you're hoping that the person then who is more connected or more wealthy then can also do for you. It's a vicious circle going round and round. But yes, it's gotten to the point that all of this has been normalized. It doesn't shock anybody, but you want to look into the details so that you have a little bit more of entertainment, right? It doesn't shock anybody anymore.
Values
Out
lost
the window.
completely. It's not about desperation. It's not because we are
We start asking
It
ourselves
is
the
because we
question.
have zero values
We
as a
start
society.
asking ourselves the question: how are you going to get out of this pit? How are you going to get out of this pit?
Yep.
Because people are going to continue stealing. People have revved up the engine and are ready to go to gear 8, 9. If they've caught us here, caught us on the other place, how else now can we circumvent now this dragnet?
By the way, this matter that we're discussing about Beirut, if you look at its root cause, I touched on it, it's precisely what we're discussing. An inept government, corrupt, systems are falling apart because the impunity has allowed corruption to take hold. That's what's taken hold. And there are a few individuals who more or less control everything. It's like, I call it a fiefdom. Everybody has a little area which they control. And you look at the ministries where money is allocated to, and they focus on it. No intention of actually delivering a service, giving the impression, talking about it, but that's what they do. And they just plunder and plunder. Who would have thought that neglect would extend to harboring, keeping, storing badly explosive material. And look at now the effect it has had. That explosion was not a joke. A bomb might as well have been dropped there.
Yep.
Oh, that's what
And
happened
this
in
is their own doing.
Very, very big bomb.
Yes, this is their own doing.
because of two things. Because of possibly two things. And that's what we see here. Either somebody intentionally meant harm or somebody then ignored their responsibility.
Or both.
Didn't do what they were
Yes, or
supposed to do, or both. And that's what we see. Even when you want to look at it now. If you want to look at, because they talk about companies then who did not have the capacity. Somebody somewhere was supposed to be checking and said, okay, you've come to do this. You've come to present your tender. This is not the process that we use. There's a process that you have to go through to make sure that it's done properly. Even after that, are you supplying that which we ask you to supply? Somebody ignoring their responsibility, not doing what they were supposed to do. Or somebody being so greedy, like you said, somebody now wearing the thief's hat and saying, well, actually, I'm going to see if I can drop a shilling or two here to make sure that I can get my way in. Two things, either ignoring your responsibility or doing something intentionally for you to gain some kind of mileage.
In our country,
Whether it's a
it
bomb
is
that's
the
being
latter.
dropped in Beirut or whether it's money that's being stolen from a COVID fund, it's more or less the same
In our
thing.
country, it is the latter. There are people who saw the windfall and the opportunity to steal, and they call it, COVID imekuja. So government is going to release cash. Okay, so this is how we're going to make that money.
Eric, didn't the
And we
Mwananchi
have
talk
seen all
about
these
it
names.
also?
Oh, yes. And the government, the Mwananchi was sitting there saying, "Ni
COVID,
pesa wanataka."
Yes.
No,
Now
but
we
when-
can see.
March 13th.
But this
what did people
Mwananchi is
say?
not making enough noise. So the Nation, for example, has written a very big story here on this Nyanza counties and even naming the companies and saying some of these companies, they did face masks. These face masks were not approved by KEBS. Some of these companies were doing beds and these beds were completely substandard. You know them. You know the directors and the owners of these companies, and yet you shall keep quiet, and yet you shall sit down and worship until we get to a point where we demand answers and we demand action, and we also take action. This whole thing of talking about corruption, we shall be talking about it, we shall be behaving as if we are completely annoyed about it, but it's not a deterrent. None at all. These people have heard us before. These people have seen, you talk about 10 billion shillings lost at the Ministry of Health. Okay. You wait, COVID will come. I'll take 100.
We'll triple
We'll
it.
triple this. You see, you think we are really scared?
I see your 10 and I raise you a 30.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Think we're
that's what
scared?
it is.
Let's take another break. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation, coming up to 4 minutes to 8 o'clock. We are live on Spice FM 94.4 in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, Eldoret, Nyeri, Malindi, and also worldwide on www.spicefm.co.ke. We're also live on KTN Home. Back shortly. Good morning.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise.
You're listening to Spice FM. Online, mobile, and on radio. Facebook at Spice FM KE. spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
2 minutes to 8 o'clock. The conversation continues as we wind up this conversation on theft of COVID millions.
Actually, it appears like we are talking to ourselves or talking to a wall. It isn't really the case. It's like advice that you give to a child. It isn't as though the child is going to understand it and following it. No. It is actually supposed to provide a cushion, a safety net. So in the event of that child doing the very thing they're not supposed to do and coming a cropper, they have a reference point. It must be said, it must be pointed out. The statistics are clear on this issue. It's not something that is not understood. The World Bank and other institutions that deal with such matters have written tons and tons of documents regarding this. But in this country, Eric, you hit the nail on the head. Until we make this thing a community responsibility, where we do not accept thieves to be among us and we call them out for what they are, now, unfortunately, this process will not change.
And then those that may say that, what we're trying to do is shirking the responsibility of the government or removing. No, government has a responsibility, but we must also hold the government to account.
This one we're
don't.
not throwing it to the government because these people who still come from our communities, they are our cousins, they are our relatives, they are our neighbors.
Our brothers and sisters.
Yes.
We know them very well and we know that they're stealing.
Yes, we do.
It's a situation room, Kenya's biggest conversation. Next, let's talk about something else. Domestic workers. Good morning. It's 8 o'clock.
Sugar and spice and everything
102.5 Spice FM. Kisumu.
All right, let's look at the Hulu Highway right around Utali House. There's a gridlock there for some reason. It's very, very tight, bumper to bumper. And we know that all along the Hulu Highway, getting from the Nyeri Stadium roundabout all the way towards Westlands, it's very, very slow this morning. Well, let's look at around Kikuyu, very foggy and poor visibility on the bypass right around Kikuyu. And so that's affecting traffic because the folks have to go just a little bit slower, which I would definitely recommend. Coming off of Ngong Road, rather Mombasa Road, and then either joining Langata Road or going then towards Hulu Highway. Won't take you too long. It's not too terrible. Thika Road still causing problems because right around the drive-in, it's bumper to bumper all the way. It's moving very, very slowly this morning. So Thika Road serving up that traffic today. Okay, Ongata Rongai and then coming out Magadi Road and then joining Langata Road also is a bit slow today. Not much drama and it won't be too bad. So around the city, it's looking all right. Spice of MKE, that's how you can reach us on Twitter. Let us know what it is that you see in your neck of the woods that we can help out with or that you can help someone else with.
This is the Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric Latif, agent provocateur, the man in the chair, seasoned journalist, news hound, a man who believes in punching up, not down.
2.5 minutes.
This is the Situation Room.
Thank you very
the
much.
The only way
to Spice FM and KTN Home. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room. CT, start us off with today's proverb.
Today's proverb, my brother, when you raise a leopard, you should not be upset when it eats your goat. I'm not saying you should rejoice.
But don't be upset.
What did you expect? It's a leopard. And we know what leopards do.
Yep.
We know how they live.
Yep. We know what they eat.
We also know their nutritional plan.
All right, so let's talk about the plight of a group of workers during this COVID-19 period, and this is domestic workers. Domestic workers fall in very many categories, don't they?
Yeah, sure. We look at domestic workers. I think the first thing that comes to your mind is that people who work within a home setting and are able to either take care of your home or take care of children, that kind of thing. All right. So clamor to have this sector formalized has been in the throes of conversation for a very long time, and to look at in terms of what they're entitled to when it comes to wages and also protections for things like future pensions and health and other matters. Now, looking at COVID times, this was one sector that was highly affected because of the fact that many people then were at home. And then they had to cut back on their expenses because of what COVID offered in terms of job cuts and losses and reductions in salary. This was actually one of the sectors to have been affected quite highly that maybe we didn't really pay attention to, because guess what? They're at home and they're behind closed doors most often, and you don't really speak about them until you have an issue maybe with your children or things like that. But they were affected highly because parents then were at home, either because they lost their job or they were working from home. And so the need to then have somebody at home then was eliminated, and they had to go home. So they either lost their jobs, those who came on a daily basis, then maybe it was reduced, so they were asked to maybe come a couple of times a week, or others then told to leave completely.
Yep.
And they faced a particular plight that really was not truly addressed. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because on the same day that we talk about this, we've also seen a ruling in the Labour and Employment Court then when it comes to their protections and what needs to be done when either terminating their work or their payment or things like this. So we're going to be joined today on the line with a program manager from the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and that is Mary Kamba. And also we're going to be joined by an activist when it comes to domestic workers and their rights, and that's Ruth Mumbi. And they're with us this morning to have this conversation and look at what it really means, how we've come to the place where we are now on different levels. As we look at that, the big issues here that we're talking about, because once you think about it, everybody needs at some point somebody to be in their home and help out with that work. So if we can just start off and get into that conversation this morning and really then what it means. And I guess both of you ladies, welcome to the show this morning, Ruth and Mary.
Thank you very much, Ndu, for having us.
Thank you too for having us.
Karibunis very much, ladies, to the Situation Room. So we want to talk about the plight and the rights of domestic workers. Ruth Mumbi, you are a domestic workers activist. What is it that you advocate on behalf of domestic workers?
Okay, I'm a human rights activist, and I'm working with a group of domestic workers in Mathare, Korogosho, and Kariobangi. And as a human rights activist and a defender, my main work is to educate these women to understand the rights that they hold, and also to defend them when they become vulnerable of abuse, mostly perpetrated by their employers, and hold their hands to show how they can access justice. And basically my work has been linking these women with organizations that can help them have access to justice, and also enlightening them to understand the rights that they have.
It sounds like, a lot of things that happen all at the same time. But in terms of, accessing justice, in terms of knowing their rights, just borrowing from what we are seeing in today's paper, Made in Heaven is the headline on the Standard page 3. House helps cannot be fired without notice. The rights of house helps, just as a summary here, is that you're supposed to pay them the minimum salary of 10,107 shillings plus NSSF and NHIF. Give them 1 month notice before terminating employment, or pay a 1 month salary in lieu of notice. If you terminate employment, you must give them a certificate of service and terminal benefits. They should not work on public holidays and weekends, and they are entitled to a 1 month leave in a year. This sounds like proper formalization of this sector which has for a long time been considered, one of those very, very informal sectors. Mary.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. So you find that we have laws, and the employment laws in Kenya do not actually distinguish between a domestic worker and any other worker. So we do not have special laws, for instance, for domestic workers. That is to say that those rights that you have articulated for domestic workers are rights that accrue to any other worker.
Yep.
Now, that is where I find the biggest challenge, because the circumstances of domestic workers are completely unique. They are completely different from your circumstance, who is in a white-collar job, and so they therefore require some sort of special protection in law, if you ask me, because bundling them together with everybody in law has meant that the uniqueness of their sector has not been completely recognized and appreciated by the law, and that is why they are subjected to the violations and the vulnerabilities that we see every day.
Could you please point out some of these unique features that you speak of?
Yeah, one of those features is the fact that these workers work behind closed doors. They're isolated from everybody else, so that makes their working environment and condition very removed from the rest of us. So what happens
I don't get
to a
that.
domestic worker? Oh, you don't get that?
Yeah, they're working in my house. How are they isolated from everybody else in my house?
They're not isolated from people in your house. They're isolated from the rest of the workers. I'll give you an example. So, for instance, an organization like where I work employs whatever number of workers, say 2 or 3. So we all have a common employer. If we were to advance a cause, it would be very easy to mobilize each other. But look at a domestic worker who is a sole employee to a single employer, and therefore if they have an issue, they are working in a private premise. They're isolated from the rest of the community. The only time you know what a domestic worker goes through is when they go to a shop and they happen to just tell the shopkeeper that, by the way, huyu mama ananitesa. But before that, nobody else gets to see it apart from you, the employer, and your family. That is a very unique employment relationship, and it requires a particular special regulation, if you ask me. It requires a law that allows penetration into private homes, because a labor officer today coming to my home, I will tell them you're trespassing. This is a private home. So we require a law that enables that protection can actually be at the very place where they work, which is very, very isolated and removed from the rest of the society.
How did things change? I mean, if I can ask you, Ruth, how did things change with COVID? If we're looking at, and the complaints have come out that enter into the society COVID, and then the work space for a lot of these domestic workers has changed. What changed here?
If there is a group of people that has been highly affected by COVID-19, is the domestic workers. And as Mary pointed out, I work with a very unique group of domestic workers. These are workers who are not formally employed, but they usually go on a daily basis to their employer houses and do a casual job. So, in fact, with the legislation that you people are talking about, in many instances, the group that I do represent is not categorized in those policies that has been formulated. When COVID-19 hit Kenya, these women were highly affected. because majority of them go to Eastleigh to find work and get a living from Eastleigh. And as you are aware, there was a time shortly after COVID-19, Eastleigh was under lockdown. So not everybody could access. In fact, people couldn't even access Eastleigh. And this is a space or a place where these women were going to get their livelihood. So what it meant that these women could not even afford basic need as food, because they work on a daily basis and they are paid on a daily basis after work. And so for them, they lost livelihood. They could not be able to afford even to give and feed for their family. And through that, some have even tried to survive the pandemic. They have come with adaptive measures, and some even started selling groceries and vegetables. And then the same government later decided that even grocery sellers, wana nini hizi virusi, wana propel hizi
They're
virusi.
they're spreading the virus as well.
Yes.
Wanasambaza.
Wanasambaza, yeah, they're sambazaring the viruses. So kukakuwa people hawezi nunua hata mboga kwa mama mboga, because you are afraid the way the government has portrayed them ya kwamba hao ndio wanaosambaza virusi.
I don't want to sound unempathetic to what you're raising, because it's an important thing. But if I were to look at the worker in Kenya who derives his livelihood from daily wages, you've just described almost every worker who falls into that category. Because the plight of what you're calling the domestic worker is the same plight that the factory worker had. It's the same plight that the mjengo worker had. It's the same plight that anybody who falls in that sector where you're paid on a daily basis had to endure. So the uniqueness that you speak of may exist, but it's unique to then people who work in this sector, not specifically people who are domestic workers.
But they are domestic workers. They go to places like Eastleigh, go to Buruburu, go to Pangani to wash clothes and wash houses. But they are not protected by the law.
What kind of protections would we be seeking from the law then, or by the law? And maybe Mary can come into this. What kinds of things are you seeking to say that they would be protected? In any case, they're dealing on a day-to-day basis. It's not guaranteed that you would have employment every day. So if they were to be protected by the law, what is it that we would be looking at?
All right. Actually, before I just delve into that, just to answer, not Eric, that was City.
Yep.
Yes, City asked the question of, again, uniqueness. Now, I just want to take you back to your employment setup where you were able to organize with other workers. Look at it that way, that this is a worker who is working in a private home, as I said, and therefore even organizing is completely curtailed. And the right to organize is extremely fundamental for a worker, because it's the right on which these other rights are premised. It's the right that allows you to come today and say, can you give me a pay rise? Because you have been able to organize. And organizing gives you an effect of power. So that power is deroded of domestic workers because, again, they are just working in solitude. But now, coming to the question of what protections we would be looking for. So, because the informal sector, especially for domestic work, because there are two categories of domestic workers. So when we talk about domestic workers, we also need to have that clarity. We have the live-in domestic workers and the live-outs. So the live-outs are the ones who are coming every day and then going back to their homes. These ones actually are more vulnerable, and these ones are the ones that Ruth has particularly talked about, where, I mean, they come and work and go home. So these particular ones would require protection around so many things, because we have had many of them talking about sexual harassment, and many are not even able to report. Remember that when they are informal domestic workers who report to you every day, many of them are not given contracts. Many of them are just casual employees. I talked to some, and they were telling me, I have worked for this one employer for 13 years. They have nothing to show for that employment relationship. So the first key protection is that they must be given contracts, whether they are informal or live-in, because without a contract, it becomes very difficult to point to so many other rights and obligations of the employer. But of course, we have seen the courts have been very progressive, and they have pronounced themselves that even a verbal contract will be recognized in the face of the law. But you see, it gives the domestic worker a lot of time to prove, because the burden of proof lies with he
With
who
that worker.
alleges.
Yep.
Exactly. So
But
it becomes difficult.
I get
Yeah.
the impression that the domestic worker you're referring to is somebody who goes to seek work in a premise where perhaps the owner of that premise or the household is not known to them. But historically, if you look at many communities in this country, what we now define as a domestic worker was often a relative,
Correct.
often a younger relative, and the understanding with the parents of this younger relative was that apart from them helping with the younger children that you had, you were supposed to provide some education, some training, etc., etc. Where does this category of individual fit into this scheme that you talk of?
You see exactly where the problem is, City, because when traditionally relatives, younger relatives, were brought in to work in homes, most of them were, as you have put it, younger relatives. So the sector of domestic work actually perpetuated child labor for a very long time. And you will still see relatives who bring in younger relatives. Most of these are children who ought to be in school. Yes, it's difficult in the rural area. They were not going to school in the first place. But removing them from an opportunity to ever access education is completely unlawful. So that is the traditional notion and how it evolved. But today, we have the live-in domestic workers. Again, a large percentage do not have contracts. Many of them are paid below the minimum wage, which you have quoted this morning. They work very long hours. The day many start the day at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. They have to get children ready for school. Well, schools are closed right now, but I can actually tell you the ones that are living in are confirming the workload
It's still
is
the same.
double what
Actually, yes,
it has
it's double
increased.
because the children are at home. It sounds to
Exactly.
be, Mary and Ruth, like we're talking
Yes.
about formalizing this sector, but then shifting the
Correct.
burden of formalizing the sector not to the people who are, members of the sector, but to their employers. And I think the conversation then
Yeah.
should be had with the members of this sector to formalize themselves. Already there's a union that deals with this. Kudeha, the Kenya Union of Domestic, Hotel, and was it?
Education,
and-
Education institutions.
And institutions. That is already a
Yeah.
union that the members of this profession can fit into. But also formalization is where we have seen several other companies that come up where if I'd like to have a domestic worker in my home, I actually am contracting this company to provide the service, and they are the ones that send this. We have seen that evolution happening in the security sector, where now we are no longer employing individual guards, but increasingly people are actually getting into contracts with companies, and then those companies are the ones that are employing the guards who will be deployed to your home. This was not
That's correct.
this was not a movement that was initiated by the people who were seeking the services of guards. It was the guards who came up with that scheme themselves. So how can the domestic workers then formalize their own industry?
Now, that's where actually the answer to their dilemma lies. Because organizing will resolve the question I talked about, that it's the fundamental right. Workers need to come together. When you come together, you have a sense of power because you speak in one voice and there are many of you. So even targeting you becomes difficult for the employer. So the challenge that domestic workers have had in terms of coming together and organizing themselves is the removedness. And remember, most of them work Monday to Sunday, Sunday to Sunday. Many of them are not given a day off. So even Kudeha, the union that mobilizes and has been able to organize quite a huge following of domestic workers, will tell you one of the biggest challenges they face is that many of them are not given off days, and therefore it becomes difficult. So until we first begin by enforcing the law, let them rest on Sunday, let them rest on Saturday. It's one day in a week, whichever day it will be. Let them rest. That gives them an opportunity to go out there, to meet in Uhuru Park, meet other workers, and start a movement of domestic workers until we enforce the law to allow them to converge out there, to also allow them to access information. Many of them do not know the law that we are citing today. They do not know the minimum wage. They do not know they have a right to a rest day once in a week. They do not know that. So it has to begin with the policymakers, the government, coming right to enforce the law so that domestic workers understand there's a law that actually protects them and that they can now begin to even organize. Yes, Eric.
Where is the role of we've seen the proliferation of domestic workers bureaus and agents, because many of the people who are employing domestic workers today, if you ask them, where did you get this person from, they'll tell you, I went to a certain bureau, which is where the people who are employed as domestic workers already know, if I'm seeking work, I'll go to a certain bureau, I'll register myself, people will come and interview me there, and I will be taken home. So what's the role of these bureaus in capacity building, even for the domestic workers, or even the formalization of the industry?
No, I think they would play a critical role. Unfortunately, most of them are not. Most of them are not formed within the ambit of the law. Most of them are very random kiosks that spring up in your estate every morning. And in my own analysis, the bureaus have been a major conduit for exploitation of domestic workers. In many instances, when an employer comes to a bureau to pick a domestic worker, and then get directly negotiate on behalf, and ends up happening is that.
Mary, I think we are losing you, Mary. Let's take a quick break now at 26 minutes to past 8 o'clock. It's 26 minutes after 8 o'clock. This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. The conversation is the plight of domestic workers in COVID-19 and looking at what is it that the law provides for this domestic workers industry. What protections do domestic workers have? What protections do the employers have? Because I'm sure very many people will also complain about feeling like the law is only protecting the domestic worker. But then, is there a balance between the two? This conversation continues after this short break. We want to take a look at the weather and what's happening on the roads. It's peak traffic hour, so we want to know what you're seeing on the roads as well and which roads to avoid. The Situation Room is broadcasting on Spice FM on www.spicefm.co.ke, Spice FM KE on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter, as well as on KTN Home. We'll be back after this short break.
Spice FM, Nyeri.
All right, the sun peeking through those clouds in Nairobi at 16 degrees. We'll see highs of 24 and lows of 12. It's 14 in Nakuru, highs of 23 with showers expected later. Nyeri at 15 degrees is partly cloudy this morning and going to a session of rain not too long from now with highs of 22 and lows of 13. It's 14 degrees in Eldoret. Thunderstorms expected later with highs of 18 and lows of 12. 21 degrees and partly cloudy in Kisumu throughout the day, highs of 27 and lows of 18. Partly cloudy in Kakamega with showers expected later with highs of 24 and lows of 15. Take a look into Mombasa where rains are intermittent currently partly cloudy conditions at 24, coming back into rains with highs of 28 and lows of 23. It's mostly cloudy in Malindi at 25, highs of 28 and lows of 24, and partly cloudy in Kampala, where rains will dominate the afternoon with highs of 26 and lows of 17. In Dar es Salaam at 25 degrees, it's mostly cloudy for most parts of today with highs of 30 and lows of 22. Looking into Johannesburg, where it's mostly sunny at 7 degrees, highs of 20 and lows of 6, with those sunny conditions continuing for most parts of today. And finally, for now in Lagos, it's partly cloudy at 23, highs of 29 and lows of 22. And those partly cloudy conditions will continue through most of Wednesday.
.5 Spice FM, Kisumu.
All right, still jam-packed on the new highway. Traffic all the way from the Nyayo Stadium roundabouts leads you all the way to Westlands. Getting into the CBD, you'll have to take that turn off right at the Nyayo Stadium roundabout, and Nyayo House roundabout, rather. You should be fine after that, though, if you're trying to get into CBD. Onwards, then, to Westlands, it's going to be a bit slow, but as you get to the flyover and the bridge, you should be fine. Coming off of Langata Road and Gong Road, traffic has eased off. It's not so bad right now. Where we do have trouble spots are small parts of Mombasa Road just before Cabanas, all the way to the General Motors area, and on Thika Road, where it's still a mess because of road closure, construction, all sorts of things going on. It's also going to take you longer to get into the CBD. But we're still in traffic hours, so that's all understandable. Let us know where you might be stuck. People are asking what's going on Magadi Road. And Magadi Road now then leads to Langata Road, so there's a bit of a hold up there. No accidents that we can tell of right now. If you can find out what's going on, we'll let you know. But the Eastern and Southern bypass is coming to this other neck of the woods. It looks fine. Spice FM KE. Let us know what you see on Twitter.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM.
Room on Spice FM and KTN Home. We are having a conversation about the plight of domestic workers, especially during this COVID-19 period. And on the line with us this morning is Ruth Mombi. She is a domestic workers activist, and Mary Cambo. She is a program manager at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. We were talking about, formalization of this. We're talking about the government coming up with policies that specifically protect the rights of the domestic workers. CT?
Well, the question that has been sort of like swelling in my mind is, even as we fight for the rights of the domestic worker, do we actually have a movement that guarantees that anyone who qualifies under that banner is actually known? Meaning, do we have the numbers? Is there membership? What would be required? Because if you're talking about enforcing certain laws, certain things must come into play. You must know how many of these people exist who fall in that category. You must also know, for instance, that other things will come in. There'll be a demand and there'll be a request to understand, okay, fine. What sort of training must a domestic worker then have to be considered? Will they require certification? And we talk about workman's compensation for people who work in the workplace in this country. All these things that other workers take for granted or is taken for granted on behalf of the other workers will have to apply, but then they have to be known.
So who'd gather these statistics and this information?
I am talking to the people
To the activists.
who are championing the cause of this worthy cause. Let me preface and say worthy cause of the domestic worker.
Ruth Mombi, have you done any of this groundwork, like, collating information and knowing how many people that you're talking about who work in this sector and so on and so forth?
Yes, we've been trying to bring these women together. And as I had said earlier, we usually work with women who are based in Italy, and majority come from Madare. And we've tried to create a platform where we can bring them together, to sensitize them to understand the rights that they hold. But also the difficulty or the challenge usually comes in because majority, for you to bring them in, you need some sort of facilitation, and you can't like bring women together and keeping them in whole day without even facilitating them, and they are supposed to go out and work so that they can get food for their families. But we have tried what we can as community organizers within Mathare and Korogosho to try and bring these women together to understand. And what we've realized, the majority of these women are women of middle age and young women. And majority also are not educated, they are school dropouts. And I think through that, because of age and also educational background, that becomes a vulnerability towards them in terms of which makes them to be more vulnerable to abuse by the employer or people who give them work. And for us, basically, we have been trying to bring in partners, civil society organizations that have capacity to help us try and organize them so that they can have, in future, we want to see them more organized, to have an outfit or an organization that can help them in terms of also, when you are more organized, you have more power in terms of even bargaining with your employers.
That's
And
very
when
true.
you are-
Ruth. But so far, when you say majority have this, majority lack education, how many are you talking about? How many have you been able to bring together or even list in the areas that you've worked in, the Korogosho and Isli?
Like over 600 are school dropouts, and when I'm saying a school dropout, majority are class 8 dropouts. Well, at least wamesoma sana, it's Form 2. Form 2. They couldn't even afford to pay for their school fees. So the alternative that they had is going to venturing into domestic work.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there's been a clamor for formalization for this sector for a very long time, and it started, when we saw now it taking shape is when we looked at the minimum wage, which went across board. So minimum wage, that just in case we need to look at that, it stood at this 10,000 shillings across board for employees, not just domestic staff. This is the minimum wage for the country. Now, we're looking at a sector also, and this is for both of you, Ruth and Mary. We're looking at a sector that is hired by people who have a little bit more in their pockets and people who don't. Even the people who earn very little then have to hire domestic workers to essentially take care of their children. Does a minimum wage like this, since we're talking about formalization of the sector, then even make sense for the people who earn even less than this amount but still need a domestic worker in their employ? I guess we can start off with Mary.
Thank you, Ndu, for that question. I think really that's a very good question, very interesting question, because and I want to correct that minimum wage that is provided by the newspaper. The minimum wage for domestic workers right now is slightly over 13,000 shillings, because they have had increments over May Day, Labor Day. So it should be slightly over 13,000 shillings. And this is a huge wage, for example, actually comparing to a flower farm worker whose minimum wage is exactly half that amount. The minimum wage for flower farm workers, for example, is 6,700 or thereabout. That means a flower farm worker, as you have correctly put it, who requires the services of a domestic worker is not able to afford them.
No.
So there is actually need to harmonize the entire labor sector, because it is completely appalling. It's shocking that a worker at 6,000 will need the services of a domestic worker who is at twice their minimum wage. That is a dilemma. It's a big dilemma, and it lies squarely with the policymakers. This is the Ministry of Labor that ought to actually harmonize the wages. The problem is our wages are very colonial. When you talk about 6,700, this is a very low wage, and it is because people were working in farms, colonial farms, and were paid peanuts for that. So we have
Actually,
had
that is
very
not
little revision.
the complete picture. Because when you say colonial, one of the things that workers in farms did, they were housed.
Yes.
There was a
They were
certain,
given food.
yes, there were considerations.
Yes.
And that thinking is what has followed even with the domestic worker, because there's the thinking that if it's a live-in domestic worker, they have housing and they also eat. So
They have food.
these are realities of that sort of employment. Yes.
And
It's
so
very
even
true.
yeah, because this is the argument that has been brought about many people when these conversations began, and even for you, Ruth, to say that, because you said now if it's a minimum wage of 13,000+ shillings and this individual lives in your home, partakes of the things that you would give to your children as well. So they use electricity, water, the food that you eat is the same food that they eat. So quite a number of their expenses have been taken care of. Are these things then taken into consideration when there's this agitation for formalization, when it even comes to how much a domestic worker is paid, Ruth?
I think I can leave it to Mary to answer that because he's in the legal.
No, it's really an interesting question, and it's a difficult question. I'm not even sure I would have the answer to that. But you see, it's the question of saying that there is a need to review the wages, so that, for instance, I have been in forums where the ministry has defended that wage and said, whether you provide food or not, whether they are living in your house or live out domestic workers, this is the wage as agreed by the Ministry of Labor. So it's really a question of harmonizing, because as long as it is not realistic to pay one 6,000 and another 13, and yet the two will depend on each other for services, then there is need to review. And it is not even to lower. I'm not saying it should be lowered. It is that the wages for these other people who need these services should be realistically raised. For instance, I've given the example of flower farm workers at barely below 7,000. So it's really a review of these wages. Yeah.
Well, also, there is the burden that seems to be shifted to the employer. Remember, we're talking about domestic. So this is not a formal organization like a flower farm that is a business that's running a business. This is you running your home. And then here comes the law and tells you that you are supposed to pay this person this much. You're supposed to give them this kind of benefit. And also, it is your responsibility to remit NHIF, NSSF on their behalf. Surely. Where does the law come in and start, giving you added responsibility when you're basically just trying to run your own home?
You're running your own home, but you are an employer in every sense of that word. You have brought yourself in the way of the employment because you have decided, I'm running my family and I need the service of another person to enable me run my family. That makes you an automatic employer. So that now shifts the burden to you to also negotiate with your employer to be able to afford the services of a domestic worker. Because, you see, Eric, your rights end where mine begin. So you're running your own family. You have a right to run a family. You have a right to your own premise and everything. But once I come into that space, my rights begin right at that place. That I have a right to earn a wage. It is 13,000.
Yeah.
I have a right actually that I can go for 3 months of paid maternity leave and still come back to that employment. And they do not get these rights. They do not enjoy. They do not get to enjoy. But these rights are there. So it's really it's a catch-22.
I hear you. I hear you. And, logically and legally, you make a lot of sense. Practically, this is where the issues come in, which brings me back to what, ladies, I'm really trying to advocate here. Formalization of the domestic workers sector needs to be pushed further and more by advocates such as yourselves and the people who work in this sector. For example, all these things that I'm raising, if there was a company that I had contracted, I'd be remitting my money to that company, and the company is responsible because the company is the employer of this particular lady. This company is the one that is dealing with all the HR issues. As far as I'm concerned, I've outsourced this service to this particular company. I think that would, bridge this whole gap that we have. The company would know. So if worker so and so is taking leave, then my contract with this with Eric still stands, and I'm gonna be able to provide somebody else to come and continue providing that service to Eric when the worker who's been working in Eric's home goes. Why don't we see more of this push towards formalization and formation of companies that then employ the domestic workers?
You raise a critical point, Eric, and I completely agree with you. But I would also remind you that those very companies have been conduits for exploitation. You're talking about security guards, organized, and therefore an organization like ours will outsource the services of a guard from a security company. We will not directly engage a security worker. I tell you what happens when you pay that security company, the security company ends up undercutting the guard. Very few of them are earning the minimum wage again, and most of the organizations that contract their services are paying the minimum wage, but the company again ends up undercutting. So it becomes a broad conversation around.
But there's a solution.
Vigilance.
It's easier to get a solution with that because now you'd be dealing with a company.
directly.
As journalists, I could come and work for the Standard Group directly, or just come to the studio and broadcast. But because I'm employed by the Standard Group, if there are issues of how the Standard Group treats its workers, it's easier to deal with the Standard Group and how it treats its workers.
That's very correct.
As opposed
That's very
to
correct.
So for me, this is still a solution.
But I want to take your mind away from what we're calling a problem and consider yet another problem. It's an issue of supply and demand. So long as you have more people looking for livelihood, not even earning a fair wage, then it means that those who provide that employment have an advantage, an unfair advantage of paying whatever they like. And the person who's looking for that job will accept it because the alternative is infinitely more dismal than that. So the question that perhaps we should think of addressing, when you mentioned the government, I agree with you fully, is how do you protect the unemployed? Because the domestic worker falls into the category of the unemployed, and their unique situation, of course, requires unique attention, but we have more people looking for those same jobs than there are jobs available.
Can you allow me to come in?
Yes,
Because, I think Eric's proposal, and I'm talking from a point of experience, it's very problematic. Having companies for these domestic workers to register, for me, I think it's very problematic.
What were known as bureaus, right?
Yes, it's very problematic because they have been also they have become agency of exploitation. The exploiter, in fact, they are more exploitative for our domestic workers more than even the employers. And we have seen even with these domestic workers who have been ferried to Arab countries, how these agencies are treating them, how they are even, milking them. And, so for me, I don't think whether that's a solution.
But you see, Ruth, the agencies, as you're looking at them, those are like employment agencies. I am talking about a company. Go to a certain security company, and that is the company that has employed this person. The agency is basically just linking you with the employer.
But I'm also I'm afraid that it can for that company to turn out to be like an agency, because you're dealing with people who are not even have a proper education. How guaranteed are we that they are going to protect even them? Why can't we empower these domestic workers to to push their agenda with
But
organization.
you have a
that
valid point. You should push the agenda, but it may not seem like it makes sense. But it's been proven that collective bargaining, getting your resources together, works better for the worker. That's why you have unions. It's something that has been tested and proved. Yes, there are unscrupulous people who will want to exploit them, absolutely. But believe me, the exploitation is reduced significantly when they are actually formally in a group. The training is essential because every time you talk about formalizing or grouping people, training always comes in. And you are right, they should be trained. But they will make a stronger point for their case if they are a group, not as individuals.
I think we're mixing issues here, Eric and City, because we're talking about organizing in the form of a company, and we have given the picture of what this company would look like. The way we source the services of security guards, we understand that picture. But City now introduces the issue of the union. Those two are different outfits. And the mandates will be completely different.
The union was an example. No, I wasn't.
They are different outfits, but also it also makes it easier for a union to deal with one company, as opposed to a union doing collective bargaining agreements with separate employers.
Right.
That's very correct. That's very correct. But remember, for me, I agree with the question of organizing. Okay. Organizing in whatever form. For me, I am a strong proponent of that because, as I began by saying, there is no stronger force you can have than in the power of coming together. It gives you a lot of force. So that is important, but it cannot overlook, or it should not overlook, the challenges that we have seen. I've just given you an example. A company contracting the services of a guard through a company pays well over 20,000. Most of those guards are really underpaid. So the question of vigilance on enforcement of the law, and also really allowing workers the right to negotiate, the right to participate in decisions that affect their lives directly is very key, so that it's not eroded or taken away by the company. I in fact, when I got cut off, I was talking about the employment bureaus because that question had cropped up, and I had said the employment bureaus would be quite ideal, but unfortunately, the motive and intention of running employment bureaus is quite different. And I was giving an example of where domestic workers do not have a direct negotiation at the point of bargaining. It is the company, it is the employment bureau that negotiates on behalf of the worker. Once they go to the employment space, they find that the expectations are really, really, washed away. So it's important that you must be given that right as a worker, really.
I'd be curious to know how this would be set up. Because, kind of like what Siti alluded to earlier, is that you have quite a broad spectrum of individuals who are ready to take whatever is going to come their way. So even in any kind of agitation, they wouldn't necessarily want to go through the bothersome process of now starting to, join voices with other people and this, that, the other thing, because there's some people who are ready to snatch up work if it came. So how would something like this even begin? Would it be one individual who would now start, mushrooming support as they went along? How would something like this come together, apart from what maybe a labor and employment court were to come up with for individuals? How would this come together?
I believe the union is a critical space for organizing, and why the union becomes, a strong base for workers organizing. It is because it is recognized by the law. If you look at the Constitution, Article 41, it provides for the right to organize. So the union then becomes the first entry point and the very fundamental basis for workers to come together and organize. So that's critical. But for instance, I'll give you the example of the union that we have for domestic workers, which is nearly the sole union that's representing this cadre of employees. It's quite wide. I mean, it's talking about hospitals, educational institutions.
Yeah,
it's covering quite a wide array of Yeah, which I particularly find problematic.
But
Because-
nothing stops any of these cadres from actually forming another union that serves their interests.
Very true, very true.
You know, we have to
I want
start
to bring
somewhere.
in someone who's
Yes.
called in on the line. This is Triza
Okay.
Kimani. Triza is from the Nani Employee Leasing Company. Triza is listening in, and she's basically just felt she needs to call in and contribute to this. Good morning, Triza.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Situation Room. Triza, do you work for the employee leasing company, or do you run an employee leasing company?
We do labor outsourcing called Nani Employee Leasing Company. We've been running this company for the last 11 years. I took this space to be able to structure domestic work. And I must start by saying that it is very unfortunate that we discuss domestic work, looking at it like a victim versus an employer. And just that attitude of looking these workers, if a worker is always a victim, makes it very difficult. I think we need to look at domestic work as any other work that contributes to the economy of this country, and also look at it in terms of the person employing has equal rights to the person who is being employed. I think we have focused so much on how bad employers are, and left no responsibility to that particular worker. So as an organization, we've structured it in such a way that we ensure that the worker also takes the responsibility as much as we require the same responsibility from the employer. So if it comes to issues of work, is there the expectations? You're supposed to do 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And then the employer is supposed to provide you 1, 2, 3. So what we do, we usually give, first of all, give the soft skills to the workers. We tell them what is expected of them as they go to work. At the same time, we're able to work with our client and then discuss what they expected to give the worker. So this way you find that the employer feels if the worker does not meet this expectation, the company will also listen to me. At the same time, the employee feels that if the employer is not fair, I will also be listened to. I've heard Mary talking about that companies exploit. One of the things that we do as a company, our salaries are very open. We discuss with our client how much they want that worker to be paid, taking into consideration the minimum wage.
Okay.
So there is nothing that we are hiding in terms of what the worker is supposed to be paid. We only add our fee to be able to function, to take that human resource function for both parties. Then you are able to make sure that the statutories are given.
Yeah.
We are able to pay for them NSSF. We are able to pay for them NHIF. We are able to plan for their leave. Okay, so this way you find that the employer feels that the worker is responsible
Yeah,
as much
and-
as
and
they
it's
are also
formalized.
supposed to be responsible. Exactly.
Let's take a quick break. Teresa, Mary, and Ruth, we want to say goodbye to our audience on KTN Home that's been tuned in from 7 o'clock. Just a quick break, and then we come back and conclude this conversation. We are talking about the plight of domestic workers, especially in this COVID-19 times, and even before. And we are seeing a ruling that came out of the court yesterday. Households cannot be fired without notice. You've got to give them a month notice. You've got to give them at least pay minimum wage. You've got to ensure that they are able to take leave. And all the rights of you as an employee elsewhere are the same rights that employ that, are entitled to this employee of yours in your own home. Time for a quick break. Thank you very much for KTN Home. We'll be back shortly at 3 minutes to 9 o'clock.
You are tuned in to Nairobi's #1 soul station, Spice FM. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
Sugar and spice and everything nice.
spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
As we come to the conclusion of it, as we get to the top of the hour, we still have on the line with us Ruth Mombi. She's a domestic workers activist and a program manager at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, Mary Kambo. And also joining us on the line is Teresa Kimani, who runs an employee leasing company. And Teresa, you've just given us a background of what, for example, your company is able to do. Let's give the ladies an opportunity to respond to this. Mary, when you hear what Teresa says as a personal experience of what they've been able to do for domestic workers, what do you say to that?
I think I would appreciate the work that Teresa is doing, because she is organizing workers, domestic workers, and enabling them, a platform where they can negotiate for better conditions of employment, better than what we have seen ordinarily. So she's doing a brilliant job. But I think it's really important to add, where Teresa talks about us always looking at domestic workers as victims. I think that's not really it. For me, it is the question of power. In any employment relationship, there is a power dynamic, and that power is wielded by no other than the employer. It's not a domestic worker in your house that has power over you. So that you have to unpack that power. And I think really when we talk about the vulnerabilities of domestic workers, we are looking at it from a power dynamic perspective. Yeah.
And Ruth, what do you say to that?
Being a community organizer, I've never come across an employer who has told me that he has been assaulted or sexually molested by a domestic worker. But we have been receiving a lot of cases of assault, exploitation, rape towards these domestic workers. So when we raise this issue, it's not that tunajaribu kufanya our domestic workers wakuwe victims, but we are trying to amplify issues that are affecting this sector and a group of women. So I think we have a bias, but it is issues-based advocacy that we are doing and trying to amplify whatever is happening to women who go wash in Italy and some suburb estate in this country.
Yeah, indeed. And indeed, this cannot really be wished away. I mean, this is not something that we can even sweep under the carpet. It happens. It does happen.
Yes.
But don't you see and as we come to the conclusion of this conversation, isn't there then space for formalized organizations or companies like the one Teresa is running that would come in as the intermediaries for that?
I think...
Because now you're not going as the individual mamafua to look for employment in this company. The employer feels that they are responsible because they have engaged a company and there's a formal contract.
And then you as an individual, you're placed.
Ruth, do you want to go?
Okay, maybe Eric, I can speak a bit.
Yep.
I think when an employee has a company that has outsourced them to a client, they feel more empowered. Because when they face those like sexual harassment, they have a place to report to. And obviously, as a company, we'll pick it up and be able to follow up with that employer. So we are not only looking at the issues of money and all that. We are also looking at issues of their work environment. Because there is a work environment, we agree with our clients that our staff has to work on. So them wholly. But you see what I was saying when it comes to issues of victims, is that when we post our staff, we post them from the position of power.
Okay.
That you are going in that home to provide a service. You are not going there as a servant. You are going to provide a service. Your service is important. So you make them go there feeling that I'm not here as a victim. I'm here to provide a service. And if the environment doesn't work, I have a place to report back.
Yeah.
And obviously, we'll pick it up and be able to discuss with our clients. Our staff feels this, and this, and this. The same time, if an employer feels that they are not being respected, we'll also pick it up because it is both ways. Because even in our normal office environment, the same happens. Issues of sexual harassment is not only in the home space.
Yeah.
These things happen in all the office.
But
in
there's a
all
HR
the
manager that you can report to, or a manager that you can go to.
Exactly. So as we function as that person you can come to, and you'll be able to speak about it and be able to confront that client or that employer that you may not be able to speak to.
True. Ladies, I want to thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. Unfortunately, 1 hour is a very short time to discuss such weighty matters. We'll invite you again so we can have a phase 2 of this conversation. Asanteni sana, Ruth Mombi, domestic workers activist, Mary Cambo, program manager at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and Triza Kimani from the Nani Employee Leasing Company. Asanteni sana for joining us this morning and for your contributions.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Asanteni sana. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation at now 4 minutes after 9. Let's take a look at traffic and change the conversation again.
Spice FM. Spice up your life. 94.4 Spice FM.
All right, still some
Nairobi.
traffic on Mombasa Road, and that's just joining at the Nyayo Stadium roundabout. We'll see that it'll open up just a little bit. Still in the middle of traffic hour, but that'll change in a short while. It shouldn't be too terrible. But now we see huge traffic from Gong towards Bulbul towards Karen. And the question is, what is going on? Well, there was an accident at Kererapon, and that is what is causing the crazy traffic. It's a multi-vehicle accident, unfortunately, and it's quite the pileup. So traffic outbound on Gong Road has slowed down maximally because of this accident that has taken place headed towards Gong Town. There's still gridlock on Uhuru Highway, and that's headed towards Utali House. We will see that'll open up in a short while, guys. Everybody heading into the CBD. The traffic that was on Thika Road, obviously that has cleared up just some, and getting into the CBD from that side of the city will not be too bad. All right, we'll take a look at Gong Road in a short while and see how that has opened up and if police have gotten to the scene to be able to help with that. Spice FMKE on Twitter. Let us know what you see if in case anything does drop out of order.
This is the Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric Latif, agent provocateur, the man in the chair, seasoned journalist, news hound, a man who believes in punching up, not down. This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
And thank you very much for tuning in to Spice FM. Listen every morning, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. Just as a continuation to that story, I mean, the issue of minimum wage, really. So somebody who's earning a minimum wage in a factory as a factory worker, and then they require, of course, the services of a domestic worker in their own home, how much are they going to pay?
It's impossible. I mean, that's what I was saying, because it is it's a different kind of sector, like what you're saying. I mean, you earn a certain amount, and then you still require somebody to come and work in your home because you can't be at home, right? So it is impossible then to be able to hire somebody and then pay them the minimum wage. And now when we talk about formalization, I think that all of these factors need to be taken into consideration, because without that, it's going to be impossible to do. And at the same time, you have the demand is actually quite high in terms of those who are looking for work.
Across board.
And it
it's
cuts
not
across
only
board.
for people who have heavy salaries that require this service.
The person who's earning 10,000 shillings, the person who's earning 8,000 shillings, the person who's earning 50,000 shillings, all need this service. What are you going to do?
Even this person who's working as a domestic worker somewhere, they also need someone to help them back at home because they've left children at home. So,
So if you are to go down that line, it's an interesting rabbit hole because you will find there's somebody along that line who's being paid 2,000 shillings a month.
Yes. So they also need somebody to take care
and
of
that
their
is
child.
the reality.
Short of taking their child to their workplace, what is it that they're supposed to do? This is why I had problems with this because there's
the
such
ruling.
yes, I have problems with this ruling because what happens with those who can't be in this home space and also have children and need somebody to take care of them? Because then you're saying there are people who don't get leave in a year. Whether you want to accept it or not, whereby you say no, everybody's entitled to a leave. There are some people who don't get leave. So how do they give leave when they themselves don't get it? And that's one of the things that you have to consider. NHIF and NSSF, you have to provide that for a domestic worker. There are people who don't get that. I don't get NHIF, NSSF as an employee. How then do I do it for my employee?
I actually think taking into consideration the point that you've raised, which is valid, that the ruling was appropriate and timely. You know why? If you don't raise the bar on these issues, the depths and the degrading conditions under which people will want to get away with will be immense.
They're doing it, but CT, they're doing it now.
Yes, we have to start somewhere, and the somewhere is that court ruling. It's a reference point. The fact that you have a stop sign doesn't mean everybody stops at that stop sign, but it's there.
I think it goes actually to what Mary was saying.
Yes.
That yes, of course, the employment court looks at this is an employee. It doesn't matter what cadre of employee they are. As far as I'm concerned, the law says employee. What are the rights of an employee? 1, minimum wage, X. 2, are you entitled to X number of days per month, per year for leave? Yes. 3, are you entitled to notice period or payment in lieu of notice if you're to be dismissed from work? Yes. All those things apply to an employee, and it doesn't matter what cadre of employee. Now, the issue then goes to the policymakers to go back and start looking at, all right, so let's look at unique circumstances of the various workers.
Do you remember the case that we discussed here regarding statutory rape,
Yep.
where you have two consenting non-adults,
Yep.
choosing my words carefully here, and the young man ends up in jail.
Yep.
At a very tender age with adults, all right? And their life is negatively changed for life.
Forever.
And Justice Odonga brought this up and said, this is the law. However, this is something we must look into changing because these circumstances are not as black and white as we would like to make them.
Yep.
Same point Eric is making. But we have to start somewhere. This law, if it's applied the way it is written, yes, it will raise issues. And in my opinion, it should. It should. Because the law of supply and demand aside, there's the simple issue of human rights. And when you talk about minimum wage, what have you, you are talking about human rights issues.
True.
Yes, you are. Absolutely.
Now, you will go to countries that have been attempting to industrialize, the middle income countries, some are actually just basic third world banana republics. But you will find that child labor is something that they sort of just look the other way. And if you look at the reasoning behind it, it's like everyone in that family has to contribute to the livelihood of that family.
Yep.
So it can be ethical, it can be moral, it can be a human rights issue, but the details that are specific to that particular place now also have to come into play. And that's where, you have a point. This one is not a double-edged sword, it's a jagged-edged sword. Yes.
It's contextualization.
Yes.
There are very many people who would argue that, if you have children and making those children go to their farm to spend a day tilling the farm and coming
And
back
that's
home,
child labor.
Yes.
And parents will
These are
disagree
your
with you
own
and tell you
children.
what? It's not child labor.
Yeah. There are other families where they talk about disciplining a child. If I'm going to discipline a child, I'm disciplining my child. Now, this whole issue of mistreatment of children and children's rights come in, and it raises another issue. I mean, it's all about context and how we then tailor the laws within the context of the people in that country.
Of
The people-
of particular situations.
Yeah.
Right. And I think so. Look, it's clear that for the longest time people have taken the fact that such laws did not exist to then abuse situations, and then going on then to abuse the rights of individuals. However, I do feel that every situation is different. If you look at countries in Europe, for example, the majority of people will not be able to afford a domestic worker or au pair, as they call them. They wouldn't be able to, because there's a certain amount that you have to pay them. And it's not a question. It's not a question of try. No, it's you will, because then there's somewhere they can go and report to in case you don't.
But actually, that's why that particular term came into being. So this isn't really someone who is employed by you. It is someone who lives with you and goes to school, but also helps with this. There's that understanding. Now, the reality of these situations is as follows. If you're talking about a country like ours, the truth is, most people don't. This discussion you're having is alien. As far as they're concerned, if they're following that old model of a relative, as far as they're concerned, they're helping the relative.
Yeah.
Yes, no.
And they're helping the family of this particular relative. Because without this work and without the money they send,
Abject poverty is where you would be.
precisely.
Right.
So when you talk about rights, they actually will be aghast. They'll be wondering what on earth you're talking about.
What rights
And
do
the
you
abuse,
mean?
they'll be wondering, but we hand down clothes to them. Clothes which they didn't have.
We eat, they eat.
Yes. And every time when they go home, they say, what? This is a life they never had. So how can I possibly be mistreating this person? So it's a conversation that must begin somewhere and it must continue.
And then there are those that directly mistreat.
No. There are those who are just sadistic.
They're just completely.
Brutal and
No,
inhumane.
they are gone.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, far gone.
Yes, even if it wasn't a domestic worker, if you follow how they treat people, even in their workplaces,
Yep.
or even equal, you'll find they behave, I'm not going to say badly, because that's misusing the word. They are simply people who need help.
Yeah, and those ones now, the law takes a different turn on them, because that is the issue of human rights, that issue of mistreatment of a human being. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship you have with them, whether you're your employee, your spouse, your neighbor, it doesn't matter. It's basically just talking about abrogating destroying your own sense of community. At 9:15, this is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. Let's take a look at what's happening on, not what's happening on the road now. It's just weather, okay? What's happening in the sky? How the weather looks like this morning for various towns around the country and cities around the world. Good morning.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise.
You're listening to Spice FM.
Okay, so the sun's shining in Nairobi and it will become overcast later. It's mostly cloudy, 16 degrees, highs of 24 and lows of 12 today. In Nakuru, it will have some rain later, highs of 23 and lows of 12. Looking then into Nyeri, where 23 degrees will be the high and lows of 13, with showers expected in the afternoon. Kisumu is partly cloudy right now. It will remain that way for most of the day, with highs of 27 and lows of 18. Kakamega, we will see showers later, with highs of 24 and lows of 15. Taking a look into the coastal towns now. In Mombasa, we'll see highs of 28 and lows of 23, with showers expected, where now it's mostly cloudy at 25. In Malindi at 25 degrees as well, highs of 28 and lows of 24, with partly cloudy conditions. Kampala is partly cloudy at 21, highs of 26 and lows of 27, with showers expected for most parts of the day well into Thursday. And in Dar es Salaam, it's mostly cloudy at 26, highs of 30 and lows of 22, with showers expected later. Let's take a look then into Joburg, where it's pretty chilly still this morning. 9 degrees though, it's warming up ever so slightly. Sunny conditions to continue later. Have a crisp day with highs of 21 and lows of 6. We're taking a look then into Lagos, where it's partly cloudy still at 23 degrees, highs of 29 and lows of 22 throughout the day. The sun is out in Paris, 17 degrees strong, highs of 31 and lows of 16. and it's still a Paris summer. We'll take a look then into London, where the summer is being experienced and enjoyed here as well. Partly cloudy conditions at 18 degrees, highs of 26 and lows of 17, and wrap things up where it's just bright early dawn on Wednesday morning in New York at 24 degrees. We'll see highs of 32 and lows of 21 with sunny conditions all through.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
The conversation continues. So yesterday there was video clip that was doing the rounds on social media. It was also covered in the news. And this came from Murang'a Governor Mwangi wa Iria, revisiting what we can now call a pet topic of his. And this is that Murang'a is the one that gives Nairobi water. He has raised this issue many times before. He has said, look, where is Ndakaini Dam? It's in Murang'a County. Where is the Nyeri water treatment plant? It's in Murang'a County. Where are the catchment areas? They are in Murang'a County. And then water goes, collects in this dam, which is in Murang'a County. All of it is piped to Nairobi. And you people in Nairobi drink our water. While us people in Murang'a are left to go to the river to fetch water.
Perhaps I should add to it was a good definition, but there's one little detail. Murang'a County is in the country of Kenya.
Yeah,
Just a little detail, but please carry on with what you're saying.
So the people, the Kenyans of Murang'a County, do not consume this water that is in Murang'a County.
Have they been prevented from consuming this water?
Now, that's
why
the
don't
issue.
they consume it?
Because all this water is managed for the benefit of the people of Nairobi.
All of
Now,
it?
The conversation here is, when the water comes out of this dam, where do the pipes go? Is there a conversation that talks about how the water is then shared as a resource between the people of Murang'a and the people of Nairobi?
Is it impossible to have some kind of piping apparatus then that would allow that the people of Murang'a then would be able to enjoy the benefits of this water as well?
Yep.
Is it written down in law that they cannot actually use some of this water? Is there anything that is prohibitive in terms of nature that stops them from using this water?
Yep.
There is? What is that?
Same thing that Mombasa Port does not, the Mombasa County government does not control the port of Mombasa.
No, it's not about control. It's about sitting down and having a conversation. Look here, there's this thing here. And
which is what now he's raising. Which is what when you hear immediately after 2013 and the first county government of Mombasa was established, the governor, Ali Hassan Joho, plus other leaders from the coast were saying, all right, so this is a resource that is within the county, then we should be able to enjoy the benefits of this. So, for instance, the revenue that is generated from this resource, part of it should come directly to the county, and then another part goes to the national government. Same argument can be had, and we've also seen the same when it came to the issue of Turkana and the finding of oil in Turkana. What is it that the people of Turkana are going to benefit directly from this resource? And there was a discussion, there was a conversation, there was an agreement that for every liter of crude oil that leaves Turkana, the people of Turkana are going to get X. Now, bring that conversation to every other part. When you have a natural resource.
Do we have any legalese? Do we have any law on which we can anchor our discussion? Again, we need to probably talk to the experts. But if we have a precedence with Turkana, then we will need to have that precedence with everybody else. People who have thermal power, people who have wind power, people who have natural gas, people who have coal. It's a discussion that must be had with natural resources that are found within each and every county. And it'll go even further. If it's found in one sub-county, the sub-county may say, since it is in our sub-county, within this county, then
the people of this
particular
village
sub-county ought to be considered, yes. So, is there a framework? Is there a legal framework?
The reason why you see very many leaders bringing this up and then it's sort of pushed down the road and swept under the carpet is because this is not a conversation that very many people are comfortable having. All right? it's not a conversation that many people want to have, because you're saying, so if you've got a natural resource like the Chulu Hills, or what's that, the national park, the big Savo, the Savo National Park, how does it benefit the people of Taita Taveta County?
I think it's
This
a conversation worth
is
having.
a natural resource that generates a lot of money for the country. Tourists come to the Savo National Park. They enter the gate, which is manned by Kenya Wildlife Service. They do the services within there, which is managed by the national government, and the people of Taita Taveta County have nothing.
Doesn't make sense.
But we have an example of a similar resource that is actually owned by a county, Mara.
Yes.
So we do have a platform from which we can actually have this discussion. How did the county of the Narok end up owning the Mara? And how is it that Savo? By the way,
It's in the nods. National Park versus Reserve.
yes. Now there's a little issue here. Even when you talk about Savo, there's a small discussion that has never really been concluded between Kwale County and Taita Taveta County as to where the border begins and ends with this particular resource. It's been going on for a long time, and it doesn't appear like it's soon to be resolved. And remember, Savo doesn't just end there; it touches Masai.
Goes up and goes to Somalia.
Yeah, but touches Masai land also. It's so. I think it's a useful discussion to have.
I think it's a conversation worth having. It doesn't make sense because look at other parts of the world too, whereby you see, if we just look at the African continent, where you see that there are countries with rich deposits of natural resources. Look at Ghana, for example, and the Ashanti regions, and the Ghana's central, western, and Ashanti regions. Right, huge deposits of cocoa, second largest cocoa supplier in the world, and then huge deposits of gold as well. The people of those particular regions have been clamoring for decades. It doesn't make sense that something that puts you on the world, not country, global map, then the people in that area through which you come basically and excavate and do all kinds of things and even leave them in some kind of environmental degradation cannot benefit. That's Ghana as an example. Look at the Niger Delta of Nigeria. Ken Saro-Wiwa died because of this thing. He was executed by the government because he was opening his mouth and saying that the people of South Central Nigeria should be able to benefit, because what you do, you come, you dig, you mine the oil, people you dig for the oil, and then you leave environmental disaster in your wake, and then you leave. People are poor, there are no schools, there's nothing. I believe that the communities in certain areas should definitely benefit from a resource that happens to be in the area where they are geographically
Should they
settled.
benefit? Should they manage? You see, for example, what Cancer Oyua and then the others, the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta, they want to directly manage this resource. That they are the ones who are going to give the licenses to the multinationals that come and
do you
take
know?
No, there I have a problem there. I
No,
have a problem with that. I have a
why
same
do you,
thing.
No, why do you have a problem?
no, because
So, for instance, if we bring it out to Kenya, we are saying that Mombasa County should manage the port.
I think it should be a shared responsibility when it comes to the management of, because like I said, it's not, I don't think that because the communities who are in that area where a resource is, for example, necessarily own it. Like you said, it belongs to the entire nation. Murang'a residents, part of Kenya, right? So then when you look at resources, it's owned by the nation. So there's an administrative role that needs to be played there. And I think the responsibility should be shared. And that's why I also said that I feel that those communities who live in that area should benefit.
Directly, okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think, because there's an administrative role that can be played, what are you going to do then? Send people from the national government and say, okay, then leave that completely, let them figure out how it's going to be done, and then we just sit by and applaud when good things are done? Absolutely not. I think there needs to be a governmental and administrative role that should be played in the management of such. However, I don't think that it should be left completely to the whims of government, and people should be able to benefit and also play a role in terms of how it should be done.
The Mara provides actually a very good example because there is some government participation in how this thing works, and there's even the community participation and benefit through the conservancies. And then there is what you may call the county benefit. Yes. We actually have an example that can be followed fairly easily just by that one resource that I'm talking about. And I don't see any reason why a resource as important as water should receive any less attention. And let's throw it to the port as well. There is absolutely no reason why it is that a resource such as the port, the people who actually live in that region should not take a pole position or an important role when it comes to the benefits being doled out.
Of course, I think they should play a role.
If we take the example of the Mara, all right? So we have various community organizations, community groupings. This particular, let's say, a conservancy, Naboisho Conservancy, and they're the ones that decide how they were going to license any operator, any hotel that is going to operate within there, right? Of course, with the support of the county government. And then the national government is managing the park in terms of KWS and all. If we go that route, CT, where the community has a direct say on what is happening with their natural resource, are we going to be able to manage it properly?
Yes, we are. Because there's a role for everyone. This is what you must spell out. Yes, the community negotiates and decides, and you, the investor, talks directly to the community. It's their land anyway. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to just building, you don't just walk in the Mara and decide you're going to build. Environmentalists will come in, they will tell you, given the animal population we have in this area, the number of structures that we can actually have to safely ensure that we maintain this habitation is this. Okay? So the national government comes in, the county government comes in. Everyone has a role. It's a question of people understanding that this is your role, this is your responsibility. But the thing that really makes it useful is that the locals get employment. And for us, employment usually ensures that children can go to school.
Yes.
Your livelihood can change.
There's economic empowerment.
The biggest thing. And it is specific that they benefit. It's theirs. Now, where these issues become perhaps a little corrosive is like a place at the port. Because people feel resource at the coast of Mombasa. But you look around and you wonder, what is our participation in all this? Where are our people comes in here? Where are our people's involvement in all this?
Are your people not employed?
Now, you will ask that question and you'll find that even then they'll find there's disparity. Are people actually not employed?
Or they're not in management level? Management
If
is
not
they,
making the
if, they,
decisions.
if they are, you see, that's why the debate must take place, and people must understand. If it's a national resource, then the truth of the matter is this: the national government needs to be sensitive enough to understand that there are certain steps you must take so that the people of this area feel that their participation has not been ignored. Those steps must be taken. But in terms of running a natural resource, you want to find the best people to actually run it. So the question is, if you bring someone who isn't considered local, they're asking, so you're telling us we do not have people who can actually do this job that you have to outsource from somebody else. Then it becomes political. Now, against a backdrop of, say, something like the issues surrounding SGR and lorries and transportation and what have you, that thing becomes a political issue, so that the sober discussion that we are trying to have here goes to the wind. And yet, there is a sober discussion that can be had, so that it's understood. This is what you get. Remember, we are now privatizing berths.
Yep.
All right? We've built
Within
more
the port.
Yeah, within the port. Now, what was to stop the government from saying, okay, how many counties do we have in this country, in this region? Can we have an organization that represents the county having a berth? Meaning we will allocate a berth. You're
For
talking about
county kind
participation.
of thing,
Yes,
right.
those berths are many. And they built even more, and they're going to build even more. I'm giving this as an example.
Yeah.
That sort of thinking, so that when other people, other private organizations come in, one, you have a standard by which you can determine how these things are run. But people will say, when the question is asked, where's our participation? You say, but your county has berth XYZ. And the berths generate money. Then there's a formula for sharing that money. These are not undoable things. In the same way, with that same water we're talking about, such a discussion can take place.
And oil. 28 minutes to 10 o'clock. It's a Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. 0719-012-600. That's 0719-012-600. Is there a place to have this conversation that local communities have direct say and direct benefit from the natural resources that are found within their locality? Presently, we are seeing those are called national natural resources. What of the local communities? Let's take a look at traffic.
All right, looking much better. We don't see much traffic in the pockets that we saw it in earlier today. Mombasa Road does look good getting into the CBD, and then onto the Southern Bypass. Looks smooth all the way there as you join then Langata Road and then come down to the Timor roundabout, Bagavi Way, and the Greater Langata Road, then headed towards town. Huru Highway still has a few spots here and there where it's moving very slowly, but you should be fine getting into the CBD. Coming off of a thicker road also shouldn't be too bad either. So out of traffic hour, looking good, being able to get where you're going, and we don't expect to see traffic build up unless something major happens until evening. So if it does happen in your neck of the woods, let us know. Spice of MKE on Twitter.
Spice and everything nice. Spice FM.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
Is there a place for local communities to demand direct benefit from the natural resources found within their locality? I see some danger in the conversation and the way, especially the way the conversation is framed. For example, when Mwangi Wairia says that this water belongs to Muranga, this water belongs to Muranga.
Mwangi Wairia is a politician.
And therefore, we are the ones who should be selling the water to Nairobi.
So he's also going to tell us that Mount Kenya belongs to the people of Nyeri.
Yeah, and Meru.
And the Abadeas.
Yep. So if you're going to the Mount Kenya and you're paying for services, you should, that part of that money goes directly.
I actually think it should.
On one hand, I agree completely. Yes. It's the framing of this conversation that sometimes I have a problem with. Because I'm thinking, all right, so what are you saying, Bwana Governor? Are you saying that because this natural resource is found in your area, then the entire country has no say? You shall decide that this is ours, and you shall decide how you will sell to the rest of the country. Especially that's something that is required for the benefit of other. It's a resource that doesn't actually, cut across your country.
The difference comes in when you look at, say, for instance, a national park, and you look at the port, look at water. You actually stop talking about just a natural resource. You talk about a security resource.
Yep.
Because water is a security resource. It's not just that it's water. Anything that involves livelihoods that directly and without which life as we know it would be impossible, or something like the port, or even something like the oil, those are not just natural resources. Those are security issues. So the national government's role cannot be just that of an onlooker or somebody who sort of like waves you along. No. It has to fall in within the ambit of the greater national policy and national outlook towards things. But within that, there has to be the consideration of the locals and how they should benefit. Yes.
For sure it
the
does.
two.
You
Let's
have
go
to.
to the phone lines.
Yes.
Ed Gitonga is in Nyeri. Good morning, Ed.
Morning, Eric.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
Very well. So, Siti Muga has just asked, do the people of Nyeri also want to own Mount Kenya?
Or like Kipi or the Meru people.
Not really, but the problem is, okay, I agree. I fully agree that, okay, every community, okay, if there is a particular contribution of a certain county or a community, they have to get back something. But there is a problem, and the problem is, in Kenya, everything is politicized. And you can look, for example, at the Muranga angle.
Yeah.
Most of it, they usually speak of it when they are in political rallies or something. And at times, they actually even promise that as a political agenda. But once they occupy the seat, that's a bygone. Because to be quite honest, for example, if you look at Muranga County, there is a place like Kambiti. Kambiti is always dry.
Yep.
Come rain, come shine. The only time that it's productive is only during the mango season. And then you find that the same county, which is complaining about inefficiency of water, and yet they're providing water for Nairobi, you find the same counties are the ones during the fiscal year, they're taking back money to the treasury, and you're wondering, honestly speaking, that's the kind of development that they need to use the money on. You did not complain, yet what you're being given now is something you're not choosing. Yet you want more. Really, what do you want more for?
Is there a case, though, for Murang'a to benefit directly from the resource? That is, for example, let's not even talk about the other rivers and streams. The Kaine Dam,
yes,
right, is a resource within Murang'a County. How can Murang'a County benefit from this dam?
Okay, what I think they would do is very simple. I think if they would charge a tariff, maybe they would charge a tariff to Nairobi Water for the water that they provide. That would work. That would work.
Okay.
But directly to benefit the community, not to go to some quack fund, because I call it quack because it doesn't work like CDS and everything. You know?
Yeah.
So for me, I think yes, it can work, because as you said, CT, Pandeza Masai Mara, and even here in Nanyuki Upper or Kajeta, it works for the community. But to be quite honest, maybe it's because maybe for them they are more sensitive with their money, or maybe if I could say that. But when it comes to Murang'a and other counties, to be quite more honest, this thing is just going to be politicized. And even if the money comes, honestly speaking,
accountability and all will be a problem.
It's always going to be a problem.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. 0719-012-600. What do you think of this? You were saying something before you took up Ed's call.
No, I mean, that's the thing. That just what you were saying in terms of, yes, the people of the community should benefit. Unfortunately, there's a sensationalist angle that most politicians would add to this for their own benefit or personal alignment when it comes to them either coming back into office or for, the pursuance of a certain agenda. And that's the unfortunate thing. Because guess what? The way that people feel about resources, it takes people to an almost rabid way of behaving, when especially it comes to things like water and other resources such as that. And if you're able to touch on that particular nerve, then you've won.
It's not the resources, the money they attach to it.
Exactly. You've won. And that's why, unfortunately, you have conversations are framed in a way that's likely to cause damage to some things. Because if you sat down and had a sober discussion with a lot of these individuals, they probably don't have a problem with it being shared on a national level.
But
they would probably just like to get a benefit or two from that resource being in their area.
Is it something that stops the county from ensuring that this same water gets delivered to every citizen of that country?
Exactly.
And
why would it be so difficult?
Is there anything that stops them, really?
Why would it be so difficult?
Remember, if you're talking about the availability of resources and the things that can be done, usually you'll find that the rhetoric far outstrips any action that may actually move towards ensuring that what needs to be done is actually done. Yes. Murang'a also has a water management company. Does it not? Every county has.
Every county does.
Yes.
Every county has a water management company. Yes. And those water management companies fall under another structure, which is a regional infrastructure.
And those ones also fall under the supervision of now a larger ministry, etc., etc. It boils down to, again, the management of resource, but this is not what we're discussing here. What we're discussing here is the management of narratives. Because that water has been there for the longest time. These dams are not built at night when people are sleeping. Then you wake up the following morning and the dam has been built. No.
Which is where the issue comes in. You see, now there is Nakaine Dam. And no sooner had we even started talking about Nakaine Dam, there's a northern collector tunnel.
Yes, there is.
That is taking over all the flood water that was going into the streams and now bringing all that water again to Nairobi. And you expect that this Murang'a water company is going to be able to provide water, to supply water to the locals, and yet they don't have a catchment.
I was hoping to hear that a discussion has been had by the county of Murang'a with the national government regarding this issue, and the national government has told them to go suck a lemon. Then it would make perfect sense if they were...
Why the kind of agitation that we see then?
I would say, no, they need to agitate more, okay? I haven't heard. Maybe it has taken place and the conversation has been kept private, but I can't see a situation where the national government
Would
would
say no.
deny
It's like, did you
the
ask
county
and they said
government
no?
or
Yeah.
a discussion of that sort. I don't see how it can be impossible.
Was a proposal made and it was shut down? Did somebody say, let's try this, and it was refused?
Okay. Let's hear from Brian. Brian is in Nakuru. Good morning, Brian.
Morning, guys.
Morning.
What I was saying is that these natural resources should remain here. Like me, I'm talking about Lake Nakuru. We have large pieces of land that is just remaining idle, and the community is not benefiting from it. And the land is just there, just having big cows, the buffaloes. We don't see. They should even take out a piece of the land and cut it to us. We do them. Because if the land is generating
Brian,
billions and
as I understand you want the natural resources so you can convert that resource into something else.
yeah, because the land is just like the idol and it's generating billions, and we don't see the billions coming to us.
Okay. You know what he's saying is, look, as far as we are concerned, because we don't get any benefit from here,
It's useless.
then it's as useless as it being idle.
You just water
having
buffaloes there.
buffaloes.
Not helping.
Thank you, Brian. I think we get your point. Asante sana. 0719-012-600. The conversation continues. Should the local communities have a say on the management and also the proceeds from natural resources found in their locality? If we talk about water, then who owns water? All these streams contribute to a bigger river called the Tana River, which contributes.
They were there before humans were.
No. We now have to go back to the law. If you look at even the law governing land and the resources under the earth and the depths to which you must go to, believe me, ownership is very, very different. Don't assume that just because you're sitting on that land, everything that is under it is yours. Don't. It isn't quite as simple. And same with the water resources. I am not clear about the details of the law on this, but I have some understanding about land. If your land happens to have an aggregate that can be used as maram, my friend, you will likely find
it's no longer yours.
It may not be yours, depending on the depths to which you go. Oh, yes. And the same goes for oil. So, again, there's an understanding of what our laws. And by the way, experts craft these things, and they look into great details about this. Why do you think, for instance, it is that most of the land, a good portion of the land that we own, are actually on leasehold, specifically? So that, yes, you have the land, but it actually isn't yours. That's why you pay land rates.
You're leasing it.
Yes, you think it's yours.
For a definite period.
Yes. You see, when it comes to resources also, you need to find out what the law says about that resource, depending on how it's found, where it's found, if it's found in the earth, at what depths. All those things come into play. Now, why a conversation is important is that you take all these things into consideration and then you negotiate something that anyone looking at will consider reasonable. But the truth is, every county or every place in this country should benefit from a resource that is within their country.
Within their
county,
own
rather.
locality.
They should benefit.
Solomon in Mombasa, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, Solomon?
I'm very, very fine.
Good.
Sometimes counties are benefiting from these resources. Sometimes I discourage it. Let me take a case for Mombasa. They're privatizing the port. Currently, berth number 4 and berth number 7, there's a mysterious deal that has happened. It has been given to the Joho family. How?
Who is it mysterious to, Solomon?
Because the contract was signed just the other day, but backdated like 4 years ago. So you find the person who will be the governor, if you want any privatization of any government resources, it will end up benefiting those families.
Individuals.
Instead of, if, for example, they say the berth will be privatized but will be managed by the county government, it can make sense. That so that those revenue can be accounted as county revenues, and maybe they can be used by a county for development.
I guess
Secondly,
the argument, Solomon. Okay, go ahead. Go on.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Secondly, if you look at the major developments that are happening currently in Mombasa County, are basically over almost 400 billion government have invested in roads, in Mombasa, but by the national government. That means the national government also must have a stake in the resources because they're investing in the county also. So it's supposed to be a win-win situation. You balance at what kind of resources should be managed by the county and which one should be managed by the national government. For example, like hotels, because some of them are very small and maybe the national parks and everything, that one maybe can be done depending on the extent and how the government is spending on those institutions. We can have a balance. Yes. Yeah. Your question?
Yeah. So, what I was trying to allude to is not only the privatization or direct management, but benefits. When it comes to benefits, so it doesn't matter who is running what bus in Mombasa, the KPA. The issue is how much revenue has it generated, and how much of that revenue is going directly back to the local county.
The society.
Yes. So, for example, the same conversation we can have. We have a huge titanium mining operation happening in Kwale. How much is Kwale benefiting directly? Not that people have been employed or there's been some CSR here and there. No. How much money, how much of what is generated from this going directly to Kwale County?
Yes. Now that one will be, it should be like the government should come up with a policy between national government and county governments where if there is a major investment that is being done, either private or public, depending on the revenues that are, and it's supposed to be as at profit level, the gross margin, so that if you are a company, you have to now do your costing well. The revenue you get, 10% must go to the county government, period.
So is this something the government should decide, or is this something that should require a change in our laws?
It's something that should require changes in law, because if a law is made, it will be applicable to all. If it's a policy of a government, of a president directive, it will end once that president is done or once that
leaves office.
Not only that, it can be challenged in court.
And it can be challenged. Then secondly, when it's put in the law, it will cater. It will bring up certain conversation that each county has a resource. How can it be shared with the county?
True.
And if it is shared, if for example, like Mombasa, Port is giving maybe 400 billion, for example, a year. Maybe they say county government Mombasa is supposed to receive maybe 40 billion. The 40 billion that it receives, what is the purpose of it? Can be used in what? Because we say whatever Port brings, it deals with this, and this.
It should have a direct vote on what that money is used for, not just put in the pot and then goes into everything else.
It comes to the county government, then the county government puts it in his pocket.
All right,
you would get the end of the benefit.
Thank you very much. 0719-012-600. As we come to the conclusion of this conversation, we still want to hear from you. 10 minutes to 10 o'clock. What should the local people have a say over the resources found within their local counties vis-a-vis what goes to the national government? So we talked about Kwale, Titanium, Tana River with whatever they have with, this Kitui with coal, whatever resource, natural resource, not investment, natural resource, because others now will start talking about investment and whatever national investment or big investment is put up in your area. So the people of, that should be Nakuru County, yes, with geothermal. What is it that Nakuru County actually gets from the geothermal resource that's within their county? Good morning, 0719-012-600.
Spice FM, Nakuru. Spice up your life.
Other dangers of taking this route also will include counties tussling over resources that cross over.
That's why legislation needs to come in, because remember, our county governments in theory are supposed to be semi-autonomous.
Right.
But for instance, they actually for instance, can't go and borrow money.
They have to seek the approval of the national.
Yes,
government.
exactly. Now,
Right.
the check and balance is useful.
Mhm.
But given that they are now going to be 10 years old by the time we have our elections, around 10 years old, I think a little more autonomy should be given to them. And this, again, should be anchored in law so that even as you quibble, there's a framework within which you're having this discussion.
There's got to be something that you follow, right?
yes.
And that you go in knowing that this is the boundary that I am not able to cross, but then within this area, then I have some wiggle room to be able to do certain things. I think that's necessary to do, especially when you start to discuss things like this, because then really how far are you able to push the envelope then would be left to the discretion of everybody's mind. And we already know what kind of a mess such a thing would create.
Let me give you an
so
example.
if you knew the boundaries within which you're able to
Before the
operate
example,
going
City.
in, I think that would work.
Before the example, John from Nyandarua, good morning.
Yes, good morning. How are you? How's everybody?
We're fine, thank you.
We're fine.
Okay, I'm fine. Now, you have a very important conversation regarding natural resources. And I am commenting in particular because of Nyandarua.
Yep.
Nyandarua is a water resource area.
Yeah.
But the people of Nyandarua don't have water. They have a real problem of water. But water is supplied through Kisumu Dam to Nairobi.
You're a catchment.
And they don't enjoy that resource.
Along the Abadeas.
Come again?
You're a catchment of water along the Abadeas, and then there's the Kisumu Dam.
Exactly. But we have no water to drink. Drinking water, we don't have it. We have to construct dams and buy tanks, and yet water goes to Nairobi. So there should be a clause constitutionally, for the local people to have at least a percentage share
But
of
John,
the natural resources.
John, there is piped water in Nyandarua County.
There is?
Piped water in Nyandarua County. Is there not?
No. It's very
In
few
any
people
part-
enjoy water.
But there is piped water in Nyandarua, and there are local dams within Nyandarua. Is that not so?
Yeah, those are local dams which were constructed by the colonial people.
But nothing bars
And
the
they are
county
very
government of
brilliant people,
Nyandarua from
human
doing the same.
consumption. Yeah?
Nothing bars
Yeah?
the county government of Nyandarua from putting up new dams.
Well, they haven't started. Those are just proposals, but nothing is being done. Yeah, on the ground. So it should be constitutionally done. Yeah, that's my idea.
Okay. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for your call. Asante sana, John. Also, going to the phone line 0719012600. Paul Kinyanjui in Makueni. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation today. Yeah, I'm concerned about the resources.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that counties should do is to document. Hello? Document, yeah, the local resources that are there in each county. And then the other thing that should be, I support so much is instead of the people or counties owning the resources, there should be a kind of partnership between the private or the locals and the counties and the national government. Yeah, I remember actually when we were young, we used to see elephants passing through our communities, but today because of the population and I think the dynamic, these corridors have been interfered with. This is just an example.
Yeah.
So I think it's important there be some kind of partnership.
Okay. And then how does that benefit then? For example, now you're talking about the animals that used to cross over from the Savo through parts of Makueni County.
Yeah, like in my case, there used to be animals crossing over from the Aberdare to the Mount Kenya. And again, seasonally from Mount Kenya to the Aberdares.
Okay.
This has been interfered with by the multinational agriculture companies and the increase in population and also construction, but has never been brought to the light.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why about 6 years ago, some elephants destroyed fence in my farm. Yeah. But
point.
you see, it's just, it's history. People have forgotten. Most of those people who are young during my age are not in the communities, are outside and working farm.
So they don't get to know this. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you so much, guys.
Asante.
Thank you.
The conversation continues. I mean, as we come to the conclusion of this, how would you like this to proceed? Because it is not the first time. Mwangi Wairia did not speak for the first time yesterday. Ali Hassan Joe did not, and other leaders from Mombasa did not speak for the first time in the last 7 years. The leadership of leaders from Taita Taveta, for example, and the vast mineral resources found in Taita Taveta have talked about this. Amboseli, at some point during the 2005 referendum, had been handed over to the community, and then quickly it reverted.
I think the talk has to be, I think the talk has to be coupled with some action, because if then really serious about making sure that communities are benefiting from the resources that are available. I mean, listening to John and saying, well, we don't have any water in Yandara, we're not able to drink water, that kind of thing. If that is the case, then it goes beyond just having a word about it and then being sensationalist and then riling up your community to feel a certain type of way. It goes then towards making an active push for some kind of legislation whereby then your region then is involved in making sure that this actually then goes to the people of the community. But it goes beyond talk. Something then has to be done, and action has to start to be taken.
Private enterprise has shown us the way in many of these things. When we talk about the Mara, the arrangements that are there are with private companies. If you look at tea companies, for instance, one of the things that many tea companies around this country have done extremely well is maintain road networks beautifully at their cost.
At their own cost, yeah.
Yes. So all I'm saying, we're not talking about things which are not possible.
It's possible to be done.
But in all this discussion, do you hear a situation where you're being told the county government went to talk about this with the
and they
national
were shut
government?
down.
I haven't had that conversation. And until I have it, I will simply say that what we're hearing is political noise.
Okay. Top of the hour, remind us today's proverb.
When you raise a leopard, you should not be upset when it eats your goat. You know what I've said? Goat. I could have said goats. So.
Context?
If indeed, Eric, you gave such a beautiful context, I would be muddying the waters if I tried to add on to it.
Okay. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Situation Room today. Join us again tomorrow, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Nduo Call, CT Muga and Eric Latif signing off. Have a good and lovely day. It's now 10 o'clock.
Spice up your life.
Spice